Good evening, everybody. My name is Jen Schneider. I'm going to be your meeting facilitator tonight. I've been hired by Interfaith Sanctuary as a facilitator, but I don't otherwise work for Interfaith or have any conflicts of interest. I'm a professor at Boise State University with experience facilitating public meetings like this one, although this is my first one doing so over Zoom with this many participants. I know I would prefer that this meeting were held in person. I know Interfaith feels the same way, and the webinar format is not ideal for asking and answering questions or sharing feedback. But I'm glad that we can have a COVID-safe event and that we have so much participation. So thank you very much for being here tonight. We've organized the evening to try to make sure that you get as many of your questions answered as possible and also have a chance to share feedback in a way that makes sense for all of us. This meeting is required by the City of Boise as part of the planning and zoning process. The next steps in this process after this meeting are that the Interfaith team excuse me, will submit their formal application for a conditional use permit to the City of Boise. So tonight's meeting is an opportunity for Interfaith Sanctuary and their building partners to provide you with additional details about the proposed project, answer your questions, and hear feedback from you. Participants who may be answering questions tonight include, excuse me, Jody Peterson-Stigers, the Executive Director of Interfaith Sanctuary, and she also has members of her team with her, Luther, Miranda, and Jordan. Jerry Sturgill, who's the Vice President of the Board for Interfaith, Tom Lennon and Andy Erstad from Erstad Architects, Nick Guho from Guho Construction, and Patrick Tabler-Ulsh and Lindell Tabler, who are owners of Caliente Hair Salon and neighbors of the current shelter. So here's what you can expect to see tonight. There will be about a 30-minute presentation by Jody Peterson-Stigers, the Executive Director of Interfaith. She's going to provide some answers to frequently asked questions about the project, give you some details. Once Jody's presentation is complete, we'll move to the question, answer, and comment section of the meeting. At that time, you'll use the Q&A button on Zoom to enter your questions and comments, and those will come to me. I'm going to do my best to group like questions or comments together so that we can answer as many questions as possible. We won't be taking any questions or comments until after Jody's presentation. And there may be some questions that this team won't be able to answer. Questions, for example, that have to do with City of Boise decision-making processes. If that happens, we'll let you know when those kinds of questions should be directed to appropriate agencies. After we've taken questions using that Q&A button on Zoom for about 30 minutes, we'll switch to the raised hands function on Zoom. So you can ask questions or make comments out loud if you prefer. I'll let you know when it's time to do that, and we'll call on you in the order that hands were raised, and then we will unmute your mic. You should receive a notification that you've been unmuted. All mics are muted now to cut down on background noise, which is important for a meeting of this size. Please don't use the raised hands function until that portion of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jody, who, like I said, is going to provide some details about the project, as well as address questions that she has already received. This is her second public meeting, Interfaith's second public meeting, so she has some frequently asked questions ready to share with you.
Thanks, Jen. So first, I'd like to introduce, before we get started, our current neighbors, where we're currently at Interfaith Sanctuary Shelter on River Street. Patrick would just like to say a few words before I do my presentation. So Patrick, go ahead.
Thanks, Jody, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to tell my experiences with the sanctuary. I bought the property just over 9 years ago, and at first I was really apprehensive about having the homeless shelter, having all of the homeless around, but it has been such an experience for me. I get really emotional about it too, because we've had friends that have actually been over at the shelter. I've got clients that have been at the shelter. We never really have any issues. If we do end up with something, it's very easily taken care of. I end up calling the shelter. We speak with any of the staff, and it's all taken care of. You know, it's been a very good experience with them. I just hope the community on State Street will give them a chance. They are very good. You know, it used to be they would get kicked out at 7 a.m. and they didn't have any day programs. They've got all that now. It's such a great community over there, and they're just very genuine people. The guests that stay there are genuine people. During this pandemic, they've lost everything probably, you know, so they need a place to stay. While they get up in the morning, they go to work. We see cars parked out on the street in front of our salon that they get in them, they go to work, they're gone for the day, they come back, they go to the shelter. It's been a very good experience lately with them. And like I said, if there is a problem, it's all very much and very fast taken care of.
Thank you, Patrick. We love being your neighbor.
Thank you. And I love you guys over there too. It's been a great experience for me.
Thank you. So now I'm going to get to the presentation part of the evening. I first want to thank you all for being on this call and sincerely want to let you know that this is not the way that Interfaith Sanctuary wanted to introduce this project to this neighborhood. We had so many plans and ideas that didn't come to fruition for a lot of different reasons. So hopefully we can catch up now and really get to know each other. There is a timing issue for this shelter, and I want to explain that a little bit. Because of the pandemic, Interfaith Sanctuary has been asked to serve in a different way for safety reasons. And so currently our emergency shelter serves single men and women. And then through emergency funding, we moved our families with children and our senior and most medically fragile to a hotel. And in a strange way, that's been quite a silver lining for a pandemic year, because being able to serve our medically fragile and our families with children in a setting that's so much more stable has allowed us to do really good work. It's also given us more space. Our building currently, before the pandemic, we could serve a total of 164 guests. 40 of those beds were designated for family members, and then the additional 124 was for general population, single men and women. Now that we have the hotel shelter, we're able to serve 217 guests. And the building that we are currently in, if the pandemic funding were to end, we don't have enough space in our building to bring all the families with children back. And because of the requirements for home health care and hospice, our senior and medical fragile programming would basically go away. And so that sped up the process of trying to identify a building that would be larger and be able to accommodate the growing need in our community. And so for the past 3 years, we've looked at different options. In this moment, the Salvation Army building was for sale at a price that we felt like, as a nonprofit that's privately funded, we could probably raise the funds for. And the beauty of that building is that it's not a ground up build. It's actually got all the bones, and we just have to do infill. And so the speed in which we'll be able to create more shelter for our people in need actually is it's a relief, because the idea of moving families with children and our medically fragile back to our emergency shelter is not something that we want to do. It feels like we'd be going backwards. And so that's the motivation for this move right now. And so what I'm hoping is that we can talk tonight and we can figure out how we can be good neighbors together. I'm going to answer the most frequently asked questions that we've kind of picked up through social media, voicemails, emails, and I'm going to address those first so that hopefully I can kind of put you at ease. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this reimagined shelter. So the first question, and I do want to be super clear that sitting next to me is our architect and sitting to the left of me is our builder. And so things are still in motion, meaning they're adaptable and they could also change based on city requirements and things like that. So what we present tonight is the closest truth that we know, but there may be some wiggle. So the first question that I want to address is the bed count in this building. Our numbers right now that we hope to serve would be to have 112 beds for families with children, with additional space for cribs with babies, for babies. We'd have 22 beds in a medical dorm for men, 12 beds for a medical dorm for women, and that also would include our senior population. We'd have 24 what are called incentive beds, 24 for men, 12 for women. Incentive beds are designed really to acknowledge the guests that are working super hard. They're either going to work or they're very focused on their programming, and they are stable, but we can't find the access to housing at this point. So they're kind of stuck, and we want to keep them motivated and let them know that they're doing good. And so this allows them a little bit more privacy. It's a little quieter. They'll have a bed, a desk, a place to store some of their things, and that will hopefully keep them moving forward until we can find that appropriate housing for them. And then the general population, and we would call these the guests who may not be attached to our programming. They may not be employed. They may be doing programming outside of our shelter, or they may kind of be new to the system, not quite attached. We would have 58 beds to serve the general population for men and 36 beds to serve general population women. And so that brings our total count for beds right now to 276 beds, which means this building brings over 100 new beds into our homeless community. And just recently, I think you all heard that the settlement for the Martin case came through, and what that meant was that if there's no appropriate bed in a shelter for someone, then you can't write a ticket. And what that really means is that shelters have different qualifications. And so if Interfaith Sanctuary, who's a low barrier shelter, has no room in their shelter, and so that person goes to a different shelter that may have a religious requirement, they don't accept transgender, there may be something that's keeping them from being able to enter that other shelter system. Now there is no appropriate shelter for them, and so they may have to sleep outside. What this building does is it assures that there's more beds to make sure that we're taking care of that population who sometimes falls through the cracks. So that's a big motivation for us. And I think it's caused some confusion, like, there's going to be tent cities. It's still illegal to pitch a tent. The numbers are not very big, but what this does do is it inspires us as a community and other cities across the country to make sure you have appropriate shelter for the different people that find themselves homeless, because they're all different kinds of human beings. So I hope that kind of makes it clearer. The next question we've gotten is, are my property values going to go down if you move here? And if yes, what are you going to do about it? So I did as much research as I could. There's data on transitional housing, supportive housing, and some on emergency shelter across the country. Here's the thing that I can tell you, that the number one thing that causes property value to go down is actually when you have a low rate at school. That's the number one cause of property values declining. Property values declining with some housing projects tend to be with those that are not staffed. So they may be some sort of transitional housing program or a scattered housing program, but without the staff and management and systems in place, there can be an increase in crime and things like that. The project that we're doing is 24/7, fully staffed, completely secure, and has a place for people to be all day and all night. And so based on our programming, I believe with good faith that we will not be in effect to the property values, but I also will tell you as your neighbor, we'll do everything in our power to be a great neighbor for you and make sure that we keep the value up in the whole neighborhood. The next question was, how will you keep people from parking their cars in front of our houses? That's a interesting question. We did some car counts for you. The total amount of cars that we have for guests staying at our emergency shelter currently that are registered, that they have car insurance, and that they have a driver's license is 4. And at our hotel, it's 13. There are cars all around kind of our shelter and things like that that are unregistered. Many of them don't actually run, but they hold people's possessions. And so what we will do at our property is we will allow guests who have a registered car, who have car insurance, and who have a legal driver's license to utilize our parking spaces. And then we're working on what's called a safe parking site, meaning that you may have a car, you're concerned about your possessions, but that car's not going to run and it's going to get stuck. And so we're working on securing a piece of land where we would secure that car and safely behind a gate. We would provide transportation when needed for them to get their things, but those cars would not be allowed to park on our property or in the neighboring streets at all. And just so you know, those cars aren't legally allowed to park in your neighborhoods anyways. If you ever have an issue with a car parking like that, you can call us. There's a process and we can get that car removed within 72 hours. But most of our guests are sheltered, and so they're not using a vehicle to live in. So I don't think it's a huge number that we have to worry about, but we promise that whatever it is, we'll manage it with you. Why did you choose an area that is already predominantly low income to put a shelter? And I kind of addressed this at the beginning. I kind of feel like the building chose us. We knew that we had a need. We saw an increase in the numbers of families with children needing shelter. And we knew that our funding was going to run out within 18 months. And so in this moment, what was available, that was a very good building to do a shelter project was the Salvation Army building. And so we asked an architect, Andy Erstead, and Nick Guho from Guho Construction to come and look at that property and say, hey, would this be a good place to create this shelter? And based on the bones, the location, that's why we chose that property. We didn't think about it as like, well, we'll come to a low income area because they won't care or they won't be able to fight. That's not why at all. We went there because it was the right building and it will be a safe building. Is the city forcing you to move your shelter so they can increase the value of the real estate where your current shelter is? No, absolutely not. Interfaith Sanctuary is a privately funded nonprofit. We have a very strong board. We have a very strong community of donors, and our mission is really clear to us. And we know what we need to do in order to keep addressing the need within our homeless community. So this is all on us. This is us meeting with the city, meeting with other foundations, looking at the PIT count, looking at the waiting lists that are currently at Catch, which there's 276 families on the waiting list for any kind of housing program, and there's 374 individuals on a waiting list at Catch. That's a 4-year wait for someone to possibly get housing. And so we wanted to reimagine a shelter that if you had to be homeless for a longer amount of time, it would be less traumatic. There would be more programming, there would be more options. It would be more dignified because there would be a space that was yours on the backside of this property, and a street would no longer be how you got served. And so Interfaith Sanctuary chose to create this project, reimagine shelter, and raise the funding to do this move. What will you do about the drugs, loitering, trash, and criminal behavior that will come with your move to our neighborhood? We're just going to be really good neighbors. and I promise you this, I will never say that none of that's going to happen, because it will. There'll be some people that might stand too long and be smoking a cigarette. There might be someone drinking a beer outside. There may be some issues, but we are available 24/7. We are going to have a 24/7 phone number that if there's something that you need handled, that it's uncomfortable or it's not right, we're there to address it with you. And what we hope is, we have time before the shelter is actually ready for us to move in, probably 9 to 12 months. We hope that we can kind of work together to come up with that communication. Like, hey, if this is going on, this is what we'll do. If this is happening, this is the better route to take. But we're not going to leave the problems outside the shelter on you. The outside is as important to us as the inside. If it's our neighborhood too, and we promise you that we will do everything we can to protect the value of your neighborhood and to protect the safety of your neighborhood. We want it to be safe for our guests and for our staff as well. Where will the guests go during the day when the shelter is closed? The shelter will not be closed. So the way that this shelter operates, basically, someone who's staying in our system, they slept there for the night. When they wake up, they will have to, do chores, maybe strip a bed. They'll have breakfast. Some of them will go off to work. The kids will go to school. Some people will go into our project recovery or our project well-being. Some people will actually go to college. There's all different things that happen. The people that don't really have a plan, or they're trying to get connected to Social Security or disability, or they don't have an ID, we'll have a day shelter that's available to our guests who are in our system. Our case management will be there. We have access to catch. We have access to health and welfare. We bring agency in to actually work with our guests so that transportation isn't a challenge. Those services that aren't easy to access, we transport to. And so this is not a shelter that opens at 6 p.m. every night and closes at 7 a.m. in the morning. That was Interfaith 2005 through 2009. But now we're a shelter that's wanting to make solutions and second chances happen for our guests. We run a full-time preschool Monday through Friday. We have parenting classes. We have a food service training program that will move into our commercial kitchen. We have a work program where several of our guests work for the city of Boise, working in the park system. All of that happens within the structure of our shelter, and our guests have a place to be. The backside of the property will have a park, a community garden, a playground, and our guests are welcome to utilize this space to get better, to interview for a job, whatever, but they will not be kicked out in the morning. Will you be operating a soup kitchen for anyone in need of a meal? Interfaith Sanctuary will provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner to the guests that we are serving through our programming and through our overnight services. Currently, and I think this is important to address, because of the pandemic, a lot of agencies had to shut down. And so we had to kind of pick up and carry the nutritional support for our entire homeless population that needed a meal. And so our warming shelter, which is our day shelter program with Corpus Christi, serves everyone in the shelter system. So anyone from the River of Life, City Lights, Interfaith Sanctuary, those who would have utilized Corpus Christi, the unsheltered. That downtown system is in place right now because of the pandemic to make sure everyone gets a meal. Before the pandemic, Interfaith Sanctuary actually only provided meals to their guests. And it's because it costs a lot to be able to feed the world. And so our goal is that we get past this pandemic and then we can go back to being a little bit more private shelter. If someone did show up at the door and they needed a meal, we are of course going to give them a meal, but it's not open for people to just come in without doing intake and being part of our programming to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Will the homeless start setting up camps in our neighborhood to receive your daytime services? They won't. I can assure you of that. The people who choose to live outside, they're pretty shelter resistant. They like to be non-visible. They have kind of their own system, their own routine. The agencies that serve them are the downtown agencies. They're not going to transport themselves to State Street and find the resources that they need. They need mail, laundry, showers, and a place to rest their feet and get a meal. And those are daytime services. Corpus Christi is the hospitality day center. They do a fantastic job. More than likely, they will, well, they're staying there, and they serve that population in a beautiful way. Interfaith has never really been a shelter that has been asked to do much service for them. We do it together right now at the warming shelter because it's needed. I forgot 9. Why are you moving your shelter away from all the homeless services? That's a really good question that I want to address, because we are the homeless services. Interfaith Sanctuary provides so much of the programming that our homeless population needs for our guests. So we have a partnership with Recovery for Life that does groups and one-on-one counseling for our recovery program. We bring programming in for our mental health. We have navigation come in. We have a public defender come in to help with criminal justice, with misdemeanors, things like that. We are the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The services outside of the downtown area, like Social Security, Disability, Idaho Health and Welfare, Terry Riley, Family Medicine Residency of Idaho, those agencies we provide transport to. The services that are on State Street, like a bank, a grocery store, a library, a park, things like that, that are easy to access and doesn't require the need for transport. I think that State Street offers a lot of great service for our guests beyond what we offer. So I know, based on the numbers that we're serving right now, there's greater need than ever. And Corpus Christi, as the downtown day shelter, would not have the bandwidth to serve everyone in need in their building when they're able to open up again. But if we have a day shelter at our new location and they continue doing what they do, we've created space to serve everyone better. And so it is necessary for us to have another day shelter and another location to serve the homeless and cover the numbers and do a good job. So those are the top 10 questions. I'm going to quickly go through the reimagined shelter and then open this up for questions. Could we throw up the slides, the before and after rendering of the building? Would that be possible? Yeah. Oh, they're up. I can't see them. So I wanted you guys to be able to see, this is a drawing that was done by Ørsted Architects, and it kind of shows the shelter reimagined with lots of improvement on the front side, creating a really beautiful space, adding some beauty to the State Street corridor. And then inside that building, it's not just beds, it's classrooms, it's preschool, it's a teen room, it's a computer room, it's a day shelter, it's a full kitchen, teaching kitchen, dining room. There are all the different bed sections that I talked about. The building that sits to the right that is taller becomes the family dorm. All family programming will be in that dorm, which will allow for separate services, which I think is important. I think kids need to have a safer place to be experiencing their homelessness. So they'll have a playground, they'll have their own family dining area, and they'll have laundry and space. And then the medical dorms will have been designed basically to fit oxygen and equipment and allow care like hospice and home health. They'll have drapes so that the privacy piece is not an issue, and they'll be able to be given comfort. Our seniors will have senior activities that will allow them to not have to navigate the streets all day long. The the benefit of bringing this kind of programming just to the economics of healthcare for the homeless. While our fragile have been at the hotel, we used to probably call 911 2 to 3 times a day for our fragile who'd been out all day, and then the elements, they come in and they're not well. And while we've been at a hotel, which is almost a year now, we've dialed 911 twice because they're stable, they have a place to be all day, we take them to their doctor's appointments, we help manage their care, and that quality of life is a beautiful thing to actually get to participate in, but it's also a beautiful thing for the community. It takes a lot of pressure off that emergency medicine system. So the medical dorm is a really important feature for the humanity of it, and also because they deserve to be comfortable. And so I'd like to open it up to questions now. I think I'm gonna serve you all better if we can be kind of directed with specifics of what you need. So Jen, can you help me with that?
Yeah, you bet. We have a number of questions and comments that have come in, so we'll dive right in. So we have a question from Jeff Teskey. He says, thank you for hosting the meeting. How does Interfaith Sanctuary define success with their various guest populations?
I think in a lot of different ways. I think for our recovery group, it's, 100 days of sobriety and then employment. And ultimately, the greatest success story is when we're able to find appropriate housing for every one of our guests. But there's lots of small victories that need to happen along the way. And so I think we have milestones. But I mean, if you're measuring the success of a homeless shelter, the success is the measurement of how effective were you in moving someone into housing of their own. And that's obviously not all on our shelter because there has to be access, but it's certainly part of the requirement of our programming is to create the ability to be housed.
Okay, the next question is an interesting one. It asks about whether or not you all have considered the environmental impacts of a facility like this. They reference a similar facility in Sacramento that has had a detrimental impact on river, water, greenbelt. And they're worried about the current situation on Boise's greenbelt at the end of 13th Street, which is known for concentrated homeless activity. So I wonder if you have any information or thoughts about that.
Not at this time. I'm not sure what the experience of the greenbelt in the area that we'd be moving to. I do know that the unsheltered tend to utilize that 13th Street area. There's a low visibility there. So our unsheltered have certainly found a safe place there sometimes, but I couldn't speak to that in this new area. I'm not sure, but I will certainly find out.
Okay, and then we have a quick question that I can answer. They ask about the number of people who've logged into the meeting. It's now 282. It was 283 a minute ago. And then there's a question for Patrick, who I think left. They want to know what kinds of issues they've had as a neighbor and how the situations are handled. So Jody, I'm sure you don't want to speak for Patrick, but maybe you want to reiterate how you interact with neighbors when they do have concerns or complaints.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know that sometimes people try and park in their parking lot. And so he'll call and see if we know who those cars belong to. If we do, we have them move their cars. And there has been one gentleman I remember that was not doing very well mentally. He was outside in the parking lot, and we called our supervisor from Project Wellbeing and had her come and manage the situation. It ended up being a mental health call. So we did end up having to call the police, but we kind of supported Patrick. Patrick's kind of gotten better at it because it's one at a time. There's never hundreds of incidents happening at the same time or large groups creating a situation. It's more one issue at a time. Sometimes it's even trash, and we don't even know who made the trash happen, but will pick up the trash because he's our neighbor. And it could just as easily have been someone not at our shelter, but it could be people at our shelter too. So we just work together to make sure that it gets taken care of.
And there's a comment that also would have been for Patrick, which is that there's an important difference between being a neighbor as a business and having your home next to a shelter like this. So there there's a question for Patrick, so we'll move on, but I just want
Okay.
to capture that comment. Okay, a question from Aaron Roos Sullivan. They ask, there are a lot of people in opposition, and they say that over 1,000 people have signed a petition or may sign a petition, I'm not sure. And so they wonder what it would take for you to not move forward with this project in this neighborhood.
Interfaith Sanctuary believes that this is the right place to do this project, and we believe that we'll be good neighbors. And I've read so many of the questions and concerns and fears, and I know that we can address this together. I know that we can work together to make this project work. There is a need for more shelter space. This building is available and can absolutely manage the programming. And so I think we should work really hard to figure out how we can do this together, because people need to have a place to go. So let's try and go there instead of, not making this happen.
So there's I think a good follow-up to your comment there, with a comment and a question. And the gist of the comment is, look, we believe in your mission. You have a good organization. We want to help with homelessness, but why do this in our neighborhood? Why not, for example, choose a collaborative approach where maybe you work with members of the community to look at a variety of locations?
We definitely collaborate. We have so many partnerships that allow us to do the work we do. I mean, the way that we help our guests get housed is we work directly with Catch, and the way that we help with access to a driver's license and things like that, we work in partnership with Corpus Christi. So we are all about partnership and collaboration. The key to what we do is we have a community, and we have this amazing staff, and we provide programming and a village feel to help families feel safe and to help each other learn life skills. And there's the lesson we've learned with the pandemic is running 4 shelters is logistically very challenging and super expensive. We're willing to do it right now because it's the right thing to do, because it is a pandemic, but it's not the most efficient. It doesn't use your money the best way. And our staff, we went from 20 staff members to 39 to be able to manage these 4 different shelters. So economically, and the way that we operate, this is kind of how we do a shelter.
Another follow-up to that is that you had sort of mentioned that you maybe feel a sense of urgency around the project because of what's happened during the pandemic. But the question is, why not wait to find the best location as opposed to the one that's best for right now? Why not wait a little longer and look for an even better location that might have more community support?
I think based on conversations that we've had, no neighborhood is actually probably ready to welcome us with open arms. I think this process is inevitable, and we just have to be good at it. We need to stay in this with you guys, answer the questions, figure out what your needs are, be adaptable. This to us feels like the right neighborhood for many reasons. And there's, with almost 100% guarantee, if we went to find a different location, I'd be having the same conversation, which I think is fair. I think it's fair and legitimate to have fears and questions, but I hope that you can be open-hearted and hear about us, hear about our programming, know that we're fully staffed, know that we're 24/7. We're looking at 10-foot walls on the backside of our property, secured gates. Our guests will be secured behind those gates. This is not a shelter that is going to create large groups of loitering and drug issues and things like that. One of the studies that we found is sometimes the only increase in crime in the areas in which a shelter ends up is the increase in crime against the homeless, not so much the area. So, and those are much bigger cities and things like that, but our population is vulnerable and they need to be safe. And part of their recovery and everything else is actually having a place to be during the day so they're not surviving out on the street. Yeah, Nick has something that he'd like to add. Is your mic on?
Yeah, one of the choices when you look for a new property is the economics of it. And Interfaith is a nonprofit, and they need to best spend their money wisely. And being connected with Interfaith for the last 15 plus years, they are a very frugal organization and use their monies very wisely. And over the past couple of years, they've known that this expansion needs to take place, and they have explored other properties. But as everybody knows, the property values in Boise have gone up to higher levels, and we've explored other properties that that had square footage, but they were double the cost. And when this property came up and the price and the owner was willing to work with us to create a shelter, we welcomed it with open arms.
Nick, if I can throw in a couple of other comments. The notion of finding the perfect location, as Jody said, the discussion would continue on. One of the things about State Street that is so, I think, important is that it's on a transit line. It has, as Jody indicated, the services available that those services around in close proximity, banking, shopping, things of that nature. And it also, being on a transit line, makes it easy to get services into the facility and those that need to get out to other facilities. So when we joined you in looking at the facility, we took into consideration a lot of these criteria and transportation, location, access, all sort of came to bear on your decision, and we appreciated the thoughtfulness in trying to make sure that we weren't isolating the guests in an industrial area or in an area where they're not going to be given sort of human interactions and become part of the fabric of our community. I think the standard point, out of sight, out of mind, is no longer an acceptable solution. And so this, the economics, the logistics, the location, and on front of a very busy street with great access, I think really supports this as an appropriate and a good location.
One of the other advantages to the location is that it has one access point, and that is from State Street. And there's not surrounding side streets and back streets that offer immediate access from the shelter. So all the transactions coming and going from the shelter are from State Street. And the residential neighborhood isn't impacted by a street being right next door where people could travel up those streets easily or whatever. So the property also offers a considerable amount of green space behind it, where the guests can spend time during the day in lieu of sitting on a park bench. So.
Okay, thank you. Krista asks, with a total of 276 beds in the new shelter, will this provide enough beds for the current homeless population in Boise?
No, no, but it'll make a dent. Not based on, there's the numbers for people who are not possibly utilizing the shelter system, but are actually falling out of housing right now. The increase is definitely showing up right now. I don't know if my staff has the PIT count, point in time count for this year is not available yet, but it will make a dent, but it won't solve the whole problem. But it'll solve some of it.
And Jody, how long has the shelter been at the present location where you are now?
Since 2008.
So there's a number of comments or questions asking you to reflect on whether you've been a good neighbor, whether Interfaith Sanctuary has been a good neighbor at its current location. And there's some implications that maybe it hasn't. So folks have mentioned Rhodes Park, for example, and they would like you to talk about sort of your track record as of being a good neighbor or not.
I definitely think there's been an evolution of our shelter. In 2005, when we started, we didn't have a building, and the main mission was to provide a safe place to sleep every night. In 2008, when we were moved into the building that we currently live in, it was safe place to sleep at night, a warm meal, but then everyone was out by 7 a.m. and they blended in with the rest of the homeless population, those being served by other downtown shelters along with our unsheltered. And so there has been tent cities, there have been, I believe it was downtown someplace, there was a tent city as well when one of the other shelters had shut down. So I think that there's a history of some bad times for our homeless. I think in the last 6 years, Interfaith Sanctuary has stepped up in such big ways. Our case management team is simply amazing. The way that we are able to address issues and handle programming. I think that there are issues, and when they are, we take care of. When we know something's going on, if someone reaches out to us, we're always on it. Rhodes Skateboard Park is a downtown gathering spot. So that's not just Interfaith Sanctuary guests, that's guests who are even housed. That's a hangout for a community. So I do believe that in the last 6 years, we have created so much good programming and really good relations with our neighbors. And when we are needed, we are there. We have a great community policing program downtown. And so a lot of that activity falls to them. But if someone calls us for help, or if something's happening in Cooper Court alleyway, we address it as quickly as possible. So I think if you looked at Cooper Court alley right now, because we opened the warming shelter and provided a space for people to be during the day, Cooper Court alley is clean. There's nobody there because there's now a day shelter that's large enough to serve the need in the community. So I think we're doing a really great job now. And I think that there's always going to be situations, but if we're aware of it, we're going to do everything we can to help with it.
So a follow-up to that, Jody, is some of the commenters feel like you may be putting too much responsibility on the neighbors, saying you can call us, you can let us know, as opposed to Interfaith being proactive about problems that might come up. How would you respond to that concern?
That's such a good question, because actually we will make it a requirement for our guests to be great neighbors. It will be part of our intake process. There's been some really good neighborhood agreements that have been developed by other shelters who've landed in different neighborhoods that I'm kind of hoping we can model. And basically it just says, as a guest of this shelter and a neighbor in this neighborhood, here is the requirements. And it is about keeping it clean, being a good neighbor, helping to protect the citizens, taking ownership of that community, helping us inside the shelter, outside the shelter, and being a good steward. And so it's a requirement. Even now in our shelter today, we have, agreements, and we have policies and procedures for our warming shelter. it is not on the neighborhood. It is on us to really help our guests know how to be good neighbors and help them succeed in that. We're just saying that if you need us, we're here. If you call us and there's a situation that you're not comfortable with, if there's someone that seems like they need help and you'd like us to maybe try and get them to the shelter, we're available to do that kind of stuff. But we will make sure that the behavior on the outside of the shelter is managed and respected, just like what happens on the inside and the backside of the shelter.
A question from Blake. He wants to know, how do you vet your guests? Are multiple offenders of violence, sex, drug offenders, are they allowed to stay at the shelter?
The only offense that is screened out at our shelter is sexual offenses, because we care for children on our property. Everyone has a background check on intake. And I did see a few questions about, well, what happens if they come to your shelter and they screen as a sexual offender? We do work with another downtown shelter that has an SO dorm. And so if someone's coming to us, they're clearly new in the system, because those who are sexual offenders know which programming they're eligible to go to. So it's very rare where we do have someone who shows up in our system. But there are people who have felonies and things like that. They're currently doing probation, they're in programming, things like that. We do allow them in our shelter, and we help them to kind of manage the requirements of their programming. And we are a shelter that believes in second chances. You know, we really want to give someone who maybe has to check that box a chance to get back on their feet and be successful again. They did their time.
Jody, Aaron would like to know if you're keeping your current building, if you are able to move forward with this project.
We would not be able to buy this building without the sale of our building. So our building has been sold, and the buyer is going to lease back the building to us until this new shelter is available for us to move in. Once the new shelter is ready, we will move out of that shelter in its entirety, and it will belong to someone else.
Okay, this is a pointed question that I think is implied by a number of the comments that we're seeing so far, which is sort of like, how would you feel? So how would you feel if somebody wanted to put a shelter next to your home? And any of the three of you could answer this really, but I think it's directed to you specifically, Jody.
And I've gotten that question before, and I think I'm biased. I love working at Interfaith Sanctuary. I love my guests. I would be a good neighbor to them if they were next to me. I think there's such a great community in serving as a volunteer, as a student at a school, as a business with your employees. I think that the amount of education, opportunity, and connection that happens when a shelter is well run is a gift for that community. I consider Interfaith Sanctuary a very special place, and I think any neighborhood would be, I think we have a lot to offer the neighborhood.
If I could chime in a minute. When Interfaith Sanctuary first started, Boise was experiencing tent cities that were moving from church to church, and maybe a lot of the people listening weren't around in those days. But there was a call out to the public at that time to try to offer a building instead of tents. And at that time, my brother and another partner had an empty building down at 17th and Jefferson. And we offered that building for temporary shelter to get the tents and everything off the street and give the Boise community the homeless population a more humane place to stay at night. And one of the advantages that I think as living in a citizen of Boise and the Treasure Valley here is that it is one community that addresses homeless head on and is willing to offer these services to the homeless population to help them better themselves and to be able to get off the street and to have a humane way to sleep at night and to get the services to get back on their feet.
Thank you. So Jody, a few people noticed maybe a contradiction in your introductory comments where you said, we're not a soup kitchen, we're not operating a soup kitchen, but we will feed anybody who shows up. So I guess the question is, could you just clarify what you meant by that?
Well, I think in a neighborhood, sometimes you might come across someone who's in need and struggling. And if you wanted to bring that person to our shelter for us to help them and give them a meal and see if we can help them, you know, even sometimes we have someone bring someone with dementia to our shelter. They've wandered off. They don't know what to do with them. They're not sure if they're homeless. And so if there's someone in the neighborhood who's in need, we would never push them away. But those numbers are one every now and then. We're not going to open up our building and say, hey, we serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner to anyone in need. That's not going to happen. But that does actually happen downtown. Corpus Christi is the hospitality shelter, and their doors are open 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Saturday for anyone who's homeless or unsheltered or in the downtown shelter system. They are 100% hospitality. And so that's where that service is provided.
Thank you. So Rachel says she understands the need for these services. She's sympathetic to that and is in support, but she has young kids who walk to school every day. There's 3 schools and a retirement home in the area where you're proposing to build this project. And she really wants to hear some concrete ideas about how you will keep things safe for those kids.
Are you able to get information from Rachel? Because I'm not sure, are they walking on State Street to go to school? Like, are the children walking by themselves on State Street to go to school?
Well, if Rachel's around when we do hands raised, maybe we can.
I would need some clarification because obviously we have children staying at our shelter too. You know, currently we have 22 parents and 32 children over at the hotel. So safety is always a concern for us, but I would need to know what that looks like for her so that I could address it in an honest way.
Okay, thank you. Michael would like to know if this recorded meeting will be available after the meeting is complete, and maybe also you could comment on whether you'll make slides or the FAQ available as well.
Yes, I actually have both available and I will post them after the meeting. I'm learning as I'm answering questions, so I may want to add a few things in, but they will be available in the next couple of days online, and we'll have a link, I think, to the recorded. I'll ask, we have a production group that's helping us. I'll ask them how I make the recording available.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to skip a couple so that we hear from some new people. So Stephen wonders if you will be offering programming to people who are not in a bed. So there's 276 beds, but could there be many more people than that who you'll actually be serving?
We don't have the ability to do that. We have a certain amount of space for each of our programs. So like our recovery program and our well-being program, we want to connect those to beds. So that's kind of, you know, that's the challenge. I mean, you do want to help as many people as possible, but there are other programs and other shelter systems, but we need to be available for the guests who are asking for service from us. And right now we have waiting lists for all of our programs. So I don't see that being an option anytime soon.
Thank you. This might be a question for any one of the 3 of you. Nathan would like to know how this project might affect local businesses.
Well, I can tell you that our guests are employed. Many of them are vets attached to Social Security and disability. They have an income every month, but unfortunately, they're not qualifying for any housing. And so they are good customers. They go to drugstores. They buy their favorite snacks at a grocery store. They love a slice of pizza. Most of them have bank accounts who are in our work program and our food training program. So they're customers with banks. They love a good book. So I believe that they bring commerce. I believe that they bring an economy. I did talk to Max, who owns Americana Pizza, which is directly across from our shelter. He relocated there and his business has gone up 30%. He definitely sells a lot more slices, but he's very grateful for our community that supports him. So I think that we're good for business.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jody. I think folks are also interested in hearing kind of about worst case scenarios as well. So Anna points out that Timmy Kinner had stayed at Interfaith before his violent attack at a 3-year-old's birthday party. How will you protect this neighborhood, this new neighborhood, from that sort of violence?
Well, I do think that the daytime shelter and the supportive services that are available, we are definitely able to wrap services around people who are experiencing some mental health issues and some addiction issues. The reality is we want to make sure that we're all safe as we serve this population. So we do everything we can with consistent programming, making sure that people are getting rested, making sure they're getting the nutrition they need, connecting them to the services, helping them with their meds, you know, because sometimes it's hard to even get a prescription filled. So just like crossing the T's and dotting the I's to ensure that, you know, our guests, sick or not sick, are getting everything they need to get more stable. So that's kind of our promise, is that we're here to try and provide the necessary tools for people to get healthy and to get more productive.
So Jody, and maybe Andy, you could weigh in on this as well. What about the possibility of just expanding on your vacant parcel downtown instead of moving to this new location?
We met with ACHD. Actually, Nick and I did. The what are they called, Nick?
Right away.
The right-of-ways are owned by ACHD, so there's no way to expand the building. That has something to do with the connector, and there's height restrictions as well. And so Nick actually, when we first started talking about we need more room, the first kind of undertaking we did was an evaluation of the property and meeting with the appropriate people, because we don't own all of, like, not everything there is ours. So it was ruled out pretty quickly.
The current location is surrounded by an alley on the one side, which is a right-of-way, ACHD right-of-way for the Flying Y, and then you've got a cul-de-sac street on the other side, and you've got an alley on the other side. So the current property is a very small footprint, and we explored the possibilities of putting a 2-story there. And what the problem is the limitation of square footage to parking stalls is the current property doesn't afford that. So that's why we've explored other parcels that would be able, and the square footage, and even if we doubled the square footage on the current property building, which is 10,000 square feet, we'd be at 20,000 square feet. And even with the 30,000 square feet, we've found a way to use up all the square footage and then some.
Yeah.
And
I think,
so,
yeah, Nick, and I think the other thing about the current location is that even if you were to expand the building itself, you would still be would still not have the adequate or appropriate ground that you could have a day shelter. So
correct.
Your guests would basically be back out and not having the safety or the security of the day shelter. And I think the thing that we really, when we looked at the Salvation Army property, the property open space in the back which will be gardens and lawns, play structure, and open areas, really provide that footprint for the day shelter, and it gives the guests the comfort of having one place, not having to be sort of let out in the morning and then have them come back. And I know that's one of the big concerns is how do you manage the sort of the cycle, the time. And so that's probably the biggest challenge of the property downtown. And I think the fact that Jody just said it's been purchased, or
It has.
So that takes that away.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to pause and make a quick process comment. So in my introduction, I had said that we would do Q&A for about 30 minutes and then switch to raised hands. I think it's still really important to get to raised hands so that folks can use their voices in this format. But we have over 300 questions or comments that have come in. Of course, we won't be able to go through each of those tonight, but we will spend a lot of time in raised hands hearing your comments. So I would like to stay in this format for about 15 more minutes, and then we'll switch to the raised hands. I just want to try to get to as many more of these as we can. So Jody, the next question is, what happens when guests are expelled from the shelter for behavioral issues? Where do they get transported to?
Well, we work in partnership with another downtown emergency shelter. So we do actually call back and forth because sometimes someone has to leave that shelter to come to us and vice versa. The challenge is that our guests don't always qualify to move into that shelter system. And so we're very careful about how we manage the behavioral issues in the evening. So we have a first warning, a second warning, a third warning for certain things. And then there are some automatic 30 days out if there's aggression, things like that. It's case by case, but transport is done for our guests. Sometimes it's not to another shelter, sometimes it's to the hospital. It could be more of a mental health issue, things like that. So with the new location, we've been meeting with the staff to really determine what happens if someone comes and the behavior doesn't allow them to stay with us. And we all agree that we're going to have to come up with a transport system to ensure that they can get to another place. So it is, I'm going to be honest, it's a work in progress. We are there's some other thoughts about on property, but no bed. Kind of some levels of discipline within the shelter structure itself as well. So it's in process, but we are engaged, and we know that the option is not to just kick someone out onto the street.
Okay, so Andy, I think this might be a question for you. This is a question from another Andy who could be a neighbor of this project if it moves forward. They share approximately 100 feet of property line with the proposed project and would like you to talk a little bit about Boise code around buffers and how side and rear perimeter buffers would be handled for the project.
Thanks. I think I've seen this question actually came over to our office today, and the direct response is that we'll meet and actually will probably exceed the requirements for buffers and fencing and things of that nature. We've been talking as a whole team in the process that the city's fencing code is 6 feet. And so we would request an additional height on the fencing, and then we're working with a very capable landscape architecture firm who we've done a lot of work with, and we'll be defining the landscape buffering that would be on our side of the fence. And one of my comments to Jody was, this is one of those opportunities where you sit down with the neighbor and say, how do we solve this together? How do we get you a suitable solution that is going to give you confidence and enhance your own property value. So we are obligated by code, as the neighbor well knows, to meet the minimum standards, and that's not what we're trying to do here at all. And so we're still in the design process in so many components of this project, and that is one. And I when we did get the request, I was thinking this is where Jody shines, and that is, let's talk about it as a collective, including the neighbor being there and any of the neighbors that want to come over.
So when you said that you would not focus on meeting the minimum standards, you mean that you'll focus on exceeding them? I just
Clearly, our focus is to exceed the standards. I think the question when it came over to us was, talk about the city requirements and the separations and the minimum standards between two different uses. And so I don't think this is a question of minimum standards. This is a question of exceeding those standards to a compatible solution.
And we did, the first neighborhood meeting that we had, there was a couple of women who live directly behind, well, I probably shouldn't locate them, but they are near their property behind a fence, and they asked for a meeting with us, and we sat down and they explained kind of the challenge was that they had a pretty, the fence wasn't adequate to begin with on the Salvation Army property, and they definitely struggled with some of the activity. And we very quickly said that we will remedy that immediately. And we looked at a 10-foot steel post, wood slab, extra greenery to do sound barrier and everything. And it was a great meeting. They came with a problem and we had a very easy solution. We really want to sit down and talk and fix those kind of things. We want to be a good neighbor and make sure that everyone's comfortable. It felt really good to have that meeting and to be able to just say, yes, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Katie would like to know what number or what % of your guests transition into permanent housing, Jody.
So we did pull some numbers for you. We're going to do 3 years because the pandemic year was a little odd. As far as being able to do some placements. At the very beginning, we had some access, but anyways, in 2019, we moved 28 singles into their own housing and 25 families. In 2020, we moved 22 singles and 19 families. In 2021, which we're new, we have moved 6 singles into housing and we have gotten 2 families into housing. So those are our numbers for the last 3 years.
Okay, thank you. There are some comments from folks who would look forward to the project. And so a question that's maybe more positively valenced is, Catherine would like to know how you think the shelter might enhance the surrounding neighborhood.
I think that there's great community engagement with the shelter. We have a kitchen. At the shelter before the pandemic, we had this program called Adopt a Meal, where churches and service groups and employers would come and they would actually bring a meal and serve it to our guests and sit down and eat with them to get to know them. And with our cafe, the kitchen and all of that, I believe that we could have a community kitchen, and a community garden is being developed on the backside where I think neighbors could come in and be a part of growing food and supporting other neighbors with that food and things like that. There's tutoring opportunities for your kids to come and work with the children. 3 years ago, I think it was, we have a gala and we award the different great volunteers, donors, supporters. And we gave the Volunteer of the Year award to a 5-year-old named Grace, because she came to our shelter. We wanted to do a breakfast. It was freezing cold out. We don't have a kitchen. We hadn't been serving breakfast at that time. And we decided we wanted to do pancakes and bacon. So we did this like Facebook post and we're like, who can make pancakes and bacon and bring them over to the shelter? And we got all this involvement, and Gracie and her mom were two of the people who brought pancakes and bacon. I mean, we had bacon for days. It was crazy. But that was when Gracie met our kids. And it turned out that day that one of our little boys, it was his birthday. And so we put a candle into a pancake and we had him blow it out, but there was no cake and there was no balloons. And Gracie was just devastated. And so that next month, she started raising her own money. She does her own lemonade stands and cupcake stands, and she raises her own money to go every month and buy gifts, decorations, and she gets personalized cakes or cupcakes, and she hosts a birthday for all the children who have birthdays that month at our shelter. And she's just one example of the gifts that come to her. I know that it has changed her life, and she's older now, but her connection to our homeless population and her ability to connect to people from all different places, that's something that is valuable. That's a gift to give your children, and it's a gift to give your family, to be able to come and help someone who doesn't have quite as much as you. So there's a lot of benefit to being engaged with our shelter. There's a lot of gifts.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left in this portion of the meeting before we go to raised hands. And I have sort of two numbers questions for you. One is, what is the expected percentage of those who would leave the shelter during the day to go to work or school?
Have that in my handy little pie chart. So hold on one moment. Currently, with the pandemic, we have 16% of our guests who are actually leaving to go to employment. And we have 18% of our guests who are currently engaged in programming or training within our shelter. So that makes up about 34% of the population that we serve that are employed or in programming.
Okay, thank you. And then another kind of numbers question. Could you talk about how many people might be employed or be volunteering at the shelter, and whether or not there's adequate parking to accommodate their cars without impacting the neighborhood?
How many staff members are employed?
Yeah, and volunteers.
Volunteers, not really happening right now because of the pandemic. If they haven't been vaccinated, we are getting volunteers vaccinated, but we have a vulnerable population. So we've had to kind of really limit who can come onto our property. But in the days before the pandemic, we had over 200 volunteers. And the parking lot at our facility is not great. And so Caliente Hair Salon has allowed us to put bird stickers in the windows of our staff's cars. So our staffs are allowed to park in their parking lot so that guests and volunteers can utilize the parking lot in front of our building.
We are currently looking at the site plan and working through a couple of different options and scenarios. And so if you, for those of you who are by there, I'm sure have walked around and looked at it, along State Street, there's approximately 30 parking spaces. The city has certain requirements for landscaping and islands and things of that nature. But I think at the end of the day, the parking is going to be considerably more than your 9 or 10 spaces that you currently have. I think Jody also made a comment early on in the discussion or in the presentation that she's looking for additional parking opportunities for the guests and where they can have their cars with possessions locked in a secure enclosure, and that most likely won't be on site. So
correct. Yeah.
So I think part of the question has the concern of, is there adequate parking for staff, and is there adequate parking for guests, and adequate parking for volunteers? And I think as we work through these and get more and more refinement to the site plan, we'll have a better idea of what those actual parking counts are going to be.
Okay, like I said, there are now 360 comments. And so in terms of process, I'm sorry to end this part of it, but I do want people to have a chance to speak. I believe we can save these questions and answers and comments, and Jody, I think you and your staff should read them. Andy and Nick should take a look at them.
Right.
But for now, we're going to go ahead and shift to the next part of the meeting. So for this part of the meeting, you should see a raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. When you click that button, what will happen is I will start to see a list of participants, and it should, if the technology works, list you in the order that you raised your hand. So what will happen is I will call on you, and Noah, who's working with us on the event tonight, is going to unmute you. So first on my list is Leslie Charles. Leslie, are you there?
Okay, did you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, how many questions can I ask?
Well, there's 258 participants here still, so
Keep it short.
it's up to you, but I would love for us to be able to hear from as many people as possible.
Okay, so part of what I have is financial, because I come at things on a financial thing since I donate so much money to nonprofits. There was a project called the Community House back in the 90s, and they raised enough money to build a 3-story building that the day they opened up, it had no mortgage. I could read you kind of their mission, but it's almost identical to the current mission that Jody's trying to put forth. You can go to the Community House and read about it, and you can look at it. It's basically homelessness reimagined back in the 90s. By about 2000, they ran into financial trouble. By 2005, with multiple lawsuits, it was then taken over by the Rescue Mission. And they turned it, the Rescue Mission split their, anyway. So Rescue Mission took it over. Interfaith came because there were too many rules between Rescue Mission with the single shelters and the families and all that kind of stuff. So how can we guarantee that there's enough financing in the whole system to create this vision? I mean, we heard a little bit before it was going to be capital campaigns. Is there an endowment? Is the city going to help? Are they getting federal funds? Are they getting COVID funds? But the financial's a big deal because most of these mega homeless shelters fail because they don't have enough financing. And then the neighborhood's left picking up the pieces. So my question is, explain the financing. Hello?
We've raised the funds in their entirety for the purchase of the building, and we have foundation and donor commitment for the remodel. And then that's separate from the fundraising we do for the operations of our building. So we have always been a nonprofit, privately funded, that basically raises the money every year to make sure that we can do what we do. And there's lots of programs that are attractive to different grants and funds. And so we do pretty well that way. We have a very, very astute board. Financially speaking, they are on me like you cannot believe. They wouldn't allow us to take these steps without knowing that we have the system in place to create a shelter that is sustainable. So we are taking these steps because we have that system in place.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Okay, next in line is Tanya Kuhn, and I apologize if I'm saying people's names incorrectly. Tanya, are you there?
I am. Thanks so much. So we really appreciate your time this evening, Jody, and the question certainly from a lot of the folks that are opposing this move is not if this should happen. It's not if these services are needed. It's certainly where and how. And so we certainly appreciate your comments about you being thoughtful and wanting to collaborate, and that quote, the outside is just as important as the inside. Yet we also hear you say that you, quote, didn't think about the neighborhood, only the building, unquote. And so my question to you is, we would really love to have a pause on this process so that you can collaborate with the communities and the city planners and the mayor and the people in this city to find out what is the best way to do this with this city, where and how. And if something like the Red Lion Hotel, which you looked at briefly, is too expensive, or other places like that, or the Greyhound building downtown, how can we raise money to make those more feasible? So my question to you is, can we put a pause on this so that we can collaborate as a community?
Well, Tanya, I appreciate that. And I absolutely want to collaborate with you. And because this is a project that has time built in, based on the fact that there is a remodel that needs to happen, I feel like that gives us 9 to 12 months of really figuring out how to be good neighbors with each other. I really do believe that we can be good neighbors with you. But the pause in our line of work is not acceptable, because that pause puts people at risk. It puts human beings at risk of being out on the street and back in their cars. And so a pause is not appropriate for the job that we have. So I love the idea of collaboration. This building, we have put an offer in and are expected to close on March 25th. But I have all the time in the world to sit down and be a great collaborator with you, because if we do this together, we're going to be fine. I promise you.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Next up is Dawn Tilton.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you, Dawn.
I'm just wondering, it sounds like this project is already done, and I don't recall a city meeting ever being sent out to the neighbors. And although I, appreciate your promise, that's no guarantee. And so I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, is this meeting just to make us feel warm and fuzzy as neighbors, or is there, is this a done deal?
Dawn, planning and zoning has a requirement that before anyone can put an application in for a permit, we must have a meeting with the public. And so this is that required meeting. And that meeting is hopefully to connect with each other, learn more about the project, hear about the design of the building, and see what things that we might be able to overcome together. So this is in fact that required meeting.
Let me clarify a little more as well. The notice for the neighborhood meeting is a requirement of the zoning ordinance, which is law, and we have to have that meeting 10 days no less than 10 days before the cutoff date, and the cutoff date is February 23rd, at which point we submit the formal application into Boise City Planning and Zoning. The application process is twofold. One is for the conditional use, which is the condition to allow the use on the property, which is a designation again in the zoning ordinance. And then we also, the zone, which is a C2D zone, is a commercial mixed use zone. And it also, the D designation requires that we have design review on it. So we'll have two hearings. People will be able to comment on each of those hearings. And one is, the first hearing is most likely would be around April 12th. And that would be with planning and zoning. And then April 13th or 14th would typically be design review, and they're all scheduled. It's all public knowledge. So there's no magic behind it. It's just very scripted by law and by the city. So Your comment that there's been no notice by the city, because we have not formally submitted an application. The other thing I think is what I was excited about this meeting is to hear from neighbors about ideas like the fencing and the buffering and things of that nature. The parking is, as the design evolves, is something that I think will really be a nice improvement from what's existing right now, which is an empty building. And I think some of the neighbors were concerned that there was things happening behind the building and whatnot, even though it was gated off and whatnot. So, this is part of the process, and the neighbors will have the opportunity to speak in front of planning and zoning as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Don. All right, next up is Stephen Nellis.
Hey, how are you?
Hi.
For being here.
So, I guess the biggest concern I have right now is how many registered sex offenders will be allowed at the sanctuary at any given time?
We don't allow sexual offenders at our shelter because of our family and children programming. They've always been screened out. There is a downtown shelter that has a dorm specifically to be able to serve those with that background. And so they're screened out immediately. And that has been since we actually formed in 2005, because we have always been developed to provide the only shelter that keeps families together. So that's a good thing to know about us, is when a father is single and has children, we're the only shelter he can come to, because the other shelter actually has a men's shelter and then a women's and children's shelter. And same-sex marriage shelter, families, there's caveats that don't allow for certain shelter. We were developed to address those needs. And so family was the first founding practice of this shelter.
Thanks, Jody. And thank you, Stephen. Okay, Chris Tillman.
Hello, thank you for your time.
Hi.
I just had a quick question. So has actually a couple follow-ups too after. Is Corpus Christi for sale?
It is not. It is just temporarily closed because of the pandemic. They're working with us in partnership at the warming shelter, which is a building that's being leased temporarily during the pandemic so that we have a larger space to serve our homeless during the daytime. Once the pandemic's open, they'll go back to regular operations, and they are getting their volunteers vaccinated now. So maybe in the spring, they'll actually be at least partially open.
Okay, I'm going to try to make this quick.
Okay.
So if you look at the Shoreline Urban Renewal Project and this Capital City Development Corporation that is run by, it's Boise's redevelopment agency, it shows yours and the Corpus Christi House as all part of their projects, and it goes on for 20 years, the Boise, the redevelopment agency. So I'm just kind of curious if it'll eventually be up for sale. It just kind of seems like a conflict of interest for me that
I don't know anything about that, so I think Andy is going to take that question.
There's a whole website on it.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question, and the various planning districts in CCDC's purview are, if you look at each of the various districts, you'll see that they've taken and created plans, if you will, and those plans disregard current ownership or current uses, and they're designed to say these are a higher and better use of these properties in the future. And so it doesn't dictate that that's what has to happen there, but it says, as we look at these downtown locations in these different districts, we believe that these may be higher and better uses as the city grows and evolves and changes and emerges. So Corpus Christi may be contained in one of the plans as a piece of property, but it doesn't necessarily say they're out and somebody else is in. So.
Thanks. Jeffrey Street.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. Jody, first off, I'd like to say that in the last couple of weeks, I've certainly done my research on Interfaith Sanctuary. Your TED talk about Bodie and finding the identification was certainly something that was quite honorable, and I commend you for that.
Thank you.
And I've done my best living near the proposed location to try to be as objective about this as I could. And I'll be honest with you, tonight has frankly raised more red flags than it's kind of resolved issues. And I'll tell you, I want to be kind of detailed, and that is, in one sense, you addressed the camping issue that many people have, and you said, well, the resources for camping, people who want to camp potentially or are anti-shelter are downtown. And then the very next question you raise is, skip question 9. And question 9 is, well, what happens if you remove Interfaith Sanctuary from all the resources downtown? And then you say, well, we are the resources, so we're moving the resources with us. So you're essentially kind of contradicting yourself. And what's happened through these statements that have been made tonight feels like this is being rushed. And as you kind of said earlier, is this is a work in progress. And so I kind of was digesting that, and then it hit me, and potentially the biggest red flag of all of them came up, which is you sold your building. You got to go somewhere else. And what the message to the community here is you've said we want to collaborate, we want to hear with what you have to say in the neighborhood, but when somebody said, well, what if we find it's not the right fit? What's your decision? You said, well, we're going to overcome that together. So what you're saying is it doesn't matter what we say tonight or what we ask you. You're going forward with this. You said, look, this is part of the process. We're just checking a box. And so for the message for the community that you sent to us tonight is you're just not listening. This is a checking the box. And those of us who agree that you have a great purpose and who want to support Interfaith Sanctuary are frankly concerned.
So Jeff, let me address first of all what we meant when we said, why are we moving our guests away from services, is what I meant is that the services that are available downtown, we also are able to provide to our guests in this new location. We are a day shelter in the new location. We will have male showers. So we're duplicating to create more bandwidth for the homeless in need. So I want to be very clear about that. The rush and the not collaboration, that's exactly what this calls for. Like, ask us a question about something that we can work on together. The idea is this is an adaptable plan. It's not all done. There's an architect and a builder sitting right here. And what we're trying to do is create a shelter that fits into your neighborhood. And so when someone asks us if we can raise the fence, yes, absolutely. Can we work on sound barriers? Yes, absolutely. Do we have a curfew? Yes, absolutely. Our guests are in at 5 and they're asleep by 9. Do we have a secured back area so that people have a place to be during the day so there's not loitering in large groups? Yes, absolutely. What's a question you can ask me that we can help make this a good fit? That's what this call is about. So is there a question that I can answer that will make you feel better?
Okay, we'll circle back to Jeffrey. We want to make sure we give as many people a chance to respond as possible. So next up is Mark Montoya. Mark. It looks like Mark is still muted, Noah. See if I can. Mark, you may need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Have you got me now?
Okay, we got you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to know what efforts Interfaith has made to reach out to members of the neighborhood that may not be English speaking. Have you had any discussions with non-English speaking members of this neighborhood?
We are working with the actual agencies that support the refugees community there, and actually are really excited about a partnership that we're going to be doing with them with Global Gardens, with our community gardens. So the one in-person meeting that was specifically designed to bring kind of that immediate neighborhood to talk, we were working on actually even having people there to translate. But because of the increased number that was invited by outside sources, we had to cancel it. And so I know that the agencies that serve the refugee community are in contact with them all of the time. We're providing updated information all the time, and they see themselves as a homeless population that found a home too. And so the messaging from those agencies are very welcoming.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that question, Mark. All right, Patrick Neeser, you're up next.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm on.
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead.
Well, listen, Jody, I appreciate your presentation. It's been thorough. I've been a longtime supporter of any of the homeless agencies. I do appreciate them being outside the neighborhood, however, more in the downtown core where it seems that people naturally populate. Besides that, I'm wondering if you're willing to develop a written good neighbor policy. You say we're going to be good neighbors. If you would put that in writing and then include it in the conditional use permit. The kind of things I'm thinking of is the library going to become overcrowded with people sleeping? Is there going to be drinking in the parks around the area? Is there simply going to be an increase in numbers of people that are drawn by your shelter, but are spending their time other places? If you could put that in the conditional use permit, it would allow us to assess your performance in the future, going by your word that you're going to do a good job, and that if in fact it falls apart, we would in the future have a legitimate challenge to your permit if the things in that written policy aren't followed. Could you do that, do you think?
Patrick, I'm not sure if I can do that through the permitting, but I can promise you I can do that as a good neighbor. And I actually have a good neighbor agreement that whenever our neighbors are willing to sit down and look at this program, it's really thorough, and it does really enhance the relationship between all of the neighborhood, employee, resident, school and everything. So I'm gonna look over to Andy to see if that's something, but on my word, I will do whatever is necessary to create a relationship with a neighborhood promise with anyone who's willing to do that with me in the neighborhood. But Andy, do you?
It's a great concept, and I know that the cities are the biggest question the city will have is who enforces it, and that's certainly something we can take up to planning and zoning and ask for their advice on it as well, and we can get back to you, Patrick.
Yeah, I'd be open to learning about that because, I think it's a good discussion.
Yeah, I know that we have talked about comparable situations when we did Trica and when we did other locations that were, had concerns. So
yeah,
that's a great question.
Okay, thank you. Carrie Wepner.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Coincidentally, my question is very much aligned with Patrick's question. But first of all, I want to just thank Jody and Interfaith Sanctuary for everything you do. We honestly support you and appreciate you in our community. However, when I learned this homeless shelter was moving into my neighborhood so close to where I live, I became very concerned and started doing research. And I found a study that examined the effect of emergency shelters in Vancouver, Canada, between 2009 and 2016. And this study identified that there was a 56% increase in property crime with within 300 feet of the shelter. So these are my very nearby neighbors. And then there was an increase in crime, general increase in crime in a radius of 1,300 feet of the emergency shelter. So my family with kids, we live within that radius. And so I find this very concerning. So this being a good neighbor statement just isn't adequate enough. It doesn't make me feel safe or less concerned. It doesn't make me feel comfortable letting my daughter stay home alone by herself. So I really want to hear from you what measures you plan to do to proactively mitigate the potential for increased crime in this neighborhood, this residential neighborhood with families. How will this be addressed, and what typically happens with the Boise Police Department right now?
So, Carrie, I read a lot of those articles too, and I think if you read back at it, you would see that those were overnight shelters with no programming. There's a lot of examples of crime increasing when there's programming done for homeless, but the supportive services and the programming's not there. So with a building like ours that's staffed 24/7, has a curfew and a bedtime, things like that, your numbers of risk go down considerably. And I think when this permitting process is over, the police department actually will create a community plan like they do when a shelter opens. So they will be able to address that with us, which will be great, but I can't speak for them. But I've read a lot of articles as well, and there is some really important things to note. When a person doesn't have a place to be all day long, when there's no services available, when meals are done in another building, things like that really affect the survival crime that happens with a homeless population. So there's some other good reading about what happens when a shelter with support or supportive housing or transitional housing with support comes to a neighborhood, and crime reduces sometimes. So there's all different ways to look at this story, but our programming does not promote a lot of opportunity for crime to happen, at least not with our guests.
Okay. Thanks, Jody, and thanks
You're welcome
for that question, Carrie. Stephen Hunt.
Hi, Jody. Thanks for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Stephen.
I live a couple blocks from the proposed shelter. And I've got to say, I do have some concerns about it. I've been listening to all the proposed programming that you have in your shelter and really appreciate all of that. And it seems really well thought out. But as others have done, I've tried to do research, and I agree with you that there's a lot of nuance and a lot of studies that really just don't fit this exact situation. So I'm sort of left to judge based upon sort of my own fears and how I might guess that your approach would alleviate some of these concerns. I just want to give a little bit of background I have with this type of situation. I spent probably about 10 years living in neighborhoods in 3 different cities with a lot of homelessness. And because I didn't have much money and those neighborhoods were cheap, I guess sort of like what you guys have found. This was in 3 different cities, and my experience is that drug and alcohol use and even mental illness and sort of the behavior that those bring can be pretty conspicuous. I mean, I know it can be a minority of people who are homeless that have these issues, but you can observe them on a daily or at the very least weekly basis, and it really can impact the way that you feel in your neighborhood. And so I appreciate that you are a full day shelter. I think that's really nice. So I guess my question is specifically about substance abuse, about drugs and alcohol. I looked at the point in time survey from the past several years. I saw that in 2019, they broke it down by different types of shelters people were staying in. And I saw that of the people in emergency shelter, 25% describe themselves as having a substance abuse issue and 30% having a mental health issue. So applying these percentages, maybe it's lower, but to this shelter, we might expect maybe 40 to 50 people with substance abuse issues. So my question is, do you allow drugs and alcohol to be brought into the shelter and used in the shelter? And if not, where will these people be going to both obtain and use drugs and alcohol?
Well, we absolutely do not permit drugs and alcohol on our property. What we do is we offer safe shelter for someone who may be under the influence or experiencing some mental health issues. And we do have programming and requirements for, participating with the shelter. The history of where they get their drugs is the drug dealers tend to find our homeless population down in the alleyways in downtown. And so our hope is that we reduce risk by having a safe shelter by day, but addiction is tricky. And homeless people who are suffering from addictions, who lack real stability and things like that, they'll find their way back there, and our job is to try and create some stability for them. But the fact that we're gated and secured reduces the risk for our guests who are trying to stay clean and sober, which is one of our big goals with this property, is that if we can reduce their triggers, they'll have a much better chance of being successful. I can't end the ability to access drugs where they are accessed. Our high school students get the drugs from the same place that our homeless do. So it's an issue. It's a county, state, world issue. It's everywhere. This shelter is trying to protect and be better at reducing the risk for our homeless population.
Thanks for that question, Stephen. Up next is Paul Gaila. I'm sure I did not say your last name correctly. Sorry about that, Paul. Please go ahead. You'll have to unmute yourself, Paul.
Okay, we'll try that. I'm a nearby neighbor, and I've got a real quick comment and then a question. As far as the permits go, I see this as a suspiciously confident applicant who will buy the property before they get a P&Z permit. But having said that, a lot of my neighbors think this is a done deal already. But the other thing is, if Jody is a wonderfully well-intended person, might be a great manager, this might work out fine. It might not. I hear the word promise, 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 assure, assure. And what happens when this thing, or even parts of this thing, go completely sideways and become unmanageable? There's a $5.5, $6 million purpose-built facility that's going to stay there. And if the problems persist, our neighborhood will pay the price for that for a very long time. And if it turns out that, say, even a 10% property value drop happens on a $300,000 house, that's $30,000. Those are real dollars that will never be recovered by that homeowner. And this use is asking many, many homeowners to just make a donation to this cause through their property value. And if it turns out there is property value loss and substantial property value loss, are you willing to pay those people? And my suspicion is you're not. That's my question.
I didn't hear a question there. Can you please rephrase the question? I'm so sorry.
Paul, can you unmute yourself and repeat your question?
Yeah, just the question.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what the question is.
Am I on now?
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that you're well-meaning. What happens if this goes completely sideways and you cannot mitigate a lot of the effects?
So I got that, Paul. I need to answer your question, but I think I missed the question. Can you tell me what the question is?
You're asking our neighbors to take a very substantial risk. Are you willing to compensate them if their property value does go down?
I don't even know how to answer that. I'm so sorry. I am a good manager of a homeless shelter, but I've never built a new shelter. So I'm gonna have to, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Andy or Nick know the answer to that, but I'm not prepared to have a good answer for that, but I'll find one for you. I'll try.
Okay. Andy, did you want to jump in or should we move on?
Let's move on.
Kayloni Perry.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
We just recently moved into the neighborhood. So we live right off of Alamosa, and we're super excited basically just because we have little kids. We plan to have more. My brother lives 1 block away. He's backed up to the park. And I think our greatest concern, and I know it's probably not, I know there's a lot of research done on it and statistics on safety and such, but I think our greatest concern is the safety of our children. And I know a lot of other moms have mentioned that. And I am all for the purpose as well. I love your heart, and I love your heart for the mission of the homeless people and serving people that are in need. But a lot of people that live in this community moved here for access to the greenbelt and the park, and we don't have large backyards because the park is our yard. And this, whether it be the softball fields or the pickleball courts, those type of things. So I guess I just want to ask you, Jody, personally, like what's your advice to us as young moms with small children who use this every single day? Like, we are on the greenbelt 360 out of 365 days out of the year.
Yeah.
That's our safe spot.
Yeah, no, I had 2 boys who were so active, and I lived in the parks as well. And Kayloni, I never left my children alone in the park. We played on the greenbelt. We went on bike rides together. Not because I thought that maybe it was unsafe. It's just, good practices, you don't leave your children unattended. But if the question is, will there be more risk in the park because a homeless shelter is going there? I'm excited to be in this neighborhood, but I want to answer something super honestly with you. There's a lot of sexual offenders that live in these neighborhoods that are registered. And so that's across the community, like they have to have somewhere to go. But I do want you to realize that the shelter is not the only thing that might bring risk to small children, and that together as a neighborhood, we have to take care of each other and keep it as safe as possible. And when risk kind of reveals itself, we have to work together to mitigate it. So, it's on us to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get the proper behavior from our guests. But whether we're there or not, we all have to be responsible for the safety of our kids wherever we're outside with them. And I don't know if that's even a good answer, but I just know as a mom, that's how I would answer it, not as someone who runs a homeless shelter.
Thanks for that question, Kayloni. I just want to make a quick process comment, which is we're headed, we just hit 8 o'clock. And I want to make sure that I give our panelists a chance to take a quick break. So at 8:15, we'll take a 5-minute bathroom break, give them a chance to stretch their legs, give all of you a little break, and then we'll reconvene. But we'll go for another 15 minutes before we take that pause. So next up with the raised hand is Catherine Galdos. Hey, Catherine, it looks like you might need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have real concerns about your project because I'm personally acquainted with folks, young men that actually lived on the streets and spent a lot of time at Corpus Christi, spent some nights at your shelter. However, it was too rough at that point, even for them. They didn't even want to be there. And I've heard about the plans for who is going to be at your shelter, and I'm still hearing that you're going to be housing those adult males and females that may have addiction and mental health issues and they're not required to be in a program, and they're still at your shelter with families, with children. It's just absolutely mind-boggling to me, having watched, because these young men that I know and their dad, they have mental illness and they're diagnosed and they know they're supposed to take their meds, but oftentimes people with mental illness don't like to take their meds, and they don't. So I've watched their psychotic episodes. It's quite terrifying. It just doesn't, that's not what should be in a residential neighborhood. I don't understand why you can't separate the populations, put the women and the families and whatever in one location, and separate out the people that are more at risk of behaviors like this. And they also had addiction issues. All that stuff for many folks goes hand in hand. And it's just kind of appalling to me that you're going to bring that to a residential neighborhood. So why can't you separate those populations? Why can't you work with the city of Boise to address those issues in better fashion instead of just jamming them all in one location?
Catherine, I appreciate your question. We were actually founded on that mission to make sure that those in need would have a place to shelter. It is our philosophy that when you create safe shelter and you provide services, that there's a good chance that you can help someone get better and move forward. And so we don't see hopeless when someone is dealing with addiction and stuff. We see hope. And our families with children are very separated in this new building. Quite honestly, for the last 15 years, our families with children have lived almost in the same building with the adults, with just a segregation by side of shelter. So this is such an improvement for our families with children. It's really taking into consideration reduction of trauma and things like that. But when someone has addiction issues and mental health issues, they can and do get better. And our shelter is one of the reasons why they do. And so that's why we're here.
Thanks, Jody, and thanks for that comment or question, Catherine. Sorry, did I cut you off, Nick? Did you want to? No, okay. All right, Rhonda Larson Cockle.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yes.
Okay, great. I was wondering what variances you were asking for the city's codes.
I'm going to let Andy take that one.
Thanks. I thought you'd handle it.
Nope.
The conditional use we're asking for is the use of the shelter within the C2 zone. If one of the variances we may ask for, and I'm at this point, based on discussion so far tonight, I think we will be asking for a variance on the height of the fence, so that the perimeter fencing around the shelter is higher than the code allows. So right now, those are the two variances that we know of. We're still working through some of the design elements and issues associated with parking and capacity. So I think as we refine everything before the submission, we will confirm that. But right now, those are the two.
Thanks for that question, Rhonda. Mary Catherine Torres.
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Hi, yes.
I am a resident in the Collister neighborhood. I greatly appreciate everything that you and the volunteers and the staff at Interfaith Sanctuary do. I think that what you do in Boise is incredibly important, and that we should all endeavor to approach homelessness with a lot of the heart and the compassion that you do, Jody. My first concern, of course, though, is that, and it's been mentioned here before, that there's some rhetoric that is not productive. And I think you've mentioned that this neighborhood uses dark verbiage. And I don't think that you are meeting some of the concern with the openness that you are calling for from us. That we cite studies on property values, we cite studies on addiction and mental illness rates, and these aren't coming out of a vacuum, and they're not coming out of fear. It's coming out of verifiable fact. And when we ask for a plan to mitigate, there are a lot of loose words like, I promise to be a good neighbor. And that does very little to appease the concern. I would hope that you moving forward would recognize that this neighborhood is one of the lowest income neighborhoods in Boise. We already have plenty of subsidized housing. We have shelters nearby. There is refugee housing right across the street from the proposed shelter. This neighborhood does a significant amount for those that are in need. And so I would hope, first of all, that moving forward, that you would commit to giving us our due credit and stop with some of the PR verbiage that would cast us in a NIMBY light. Onto a question is that I am curious if Interfaith Sanctuary has ever explored options of vertical integration where you maybe explore housing first options for families or medically vulnerable adults. I think the Interfaith Sanctuary model for housing first would be great at the Salvation Army site. But do I think that an emergency shelter, right where you have a wet park, a Title I school, ACHD, and Capital City Development Corporation both have long-term visions that expand traffic to 7 lanes? We hear about parking off-site, and to be honest, I'm not sure that any resident can take faith in that. What patron of Interfaith Sanctuary is going to want to be a car ride and a locked gate away from their belongings when, as you have noted, that's probably all they have left in the world? I'm serious.
Is that your question?
So the biggest question, and then my biggest question is to get a firm commitment from you that you will acknowledge that this neighborhood has and does plenty, and that the verbiage that we are NIMBY or that we're dark or that we are approaching this out of fear is simply a public relations stunt.
Well, I can certainly say that I haven't said any of those accusations, but it has been very dark. And the description that you give to our homeless population in general, not you in specific, imagining kind of the worst characteristics and the smallest percentage of our homeless has been pretty hurtful to our guests, our staff, and myself. I'm not blaming anyone, but we didn't know that that's what we would see on the feeds and here on TV and stuff. So we're all caught off guard by it. And I will tell you also that if you read some of the studies, the best way to ensure a successful transition for a shelter is a welcoming neighborhood. It reduces a lot of risk because a lot of behavior comes from feeling unwelcomed and unsafe. And so a good conversation to have is to promise to be good neighbors, because that is the way that you find a community to serve together. We're not asking you to do anything. We're not going to take your resources. We're going to bring community to the neighborhood, and we will provide the resources and assistance and everything. All we're asking is that you give us the opportunity to be a good neighbor. And yes, we do promise, because we do it every day. We work really hard to keep people safe in all 4 of our shelters, and we've had to manage a lot of different ideas and opinions about our homeless, and some are true and some are not. And I think we all need to be able to open up the conversation about all the different people who find themselves in homelessness that we serve, that deserve to live in a neighborhood. And so it's not PR, it's our job. It's our job to serve and to find a safe place for our guests. And this has been very difficult.
Okay, thanks, Jody, and thanks for your comments and questions, Mary Catherine. Gary Zimmerman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Jody. Thank you for holding this meeting this evening and taking the time to address some of our questions. In this meeting tonight, you have mentioned, and your team, that at least in part, the costing of the building is a strong rationale for your proposed move. And while, of course, you are going to strive to minimize neighborhood impacts, you have also acknowledged, either explicitly or implicitly, that there would likely be additional crime, trash, cars, etc. Since you're viewing our neighborhood as essentially a budget location for your proposed shelter, are you willing to put some real dollars back into our neighborhood to more broadly improve it, such as safety improvements, appearance improvements, things like if we need additional crosswalks, sidewalks, other helping to drive other commercial and retail to our location, since clearly you're taking a commercial slot if your proposal is supported by the city. Is that something you would commit to doing, to putting real money back into our neighborhood and being a good neighbor instead of essentially putting a load on our neighborhood?
Gary, this is Nick. I'm going to answer that question. When I answered the question earlier or described the basically the philosophy of Sanctuary to spend their money wisely, they are very prudent in how they spend money, which gives them the opportunity to offer all these additional services to the community, which allows the homeless population to be better served. And we're always looking at the surrounding bus stops, the crosswalks, accessibility for the homeless people and the communities to get from point A to point B. And when we were looking at this site, it checked off all the boxes for accessibility for the homeless to safely get in and out of the community, to go to the green belt. They have just as much a right to use the green belt, the park, and the libraries as all of us do. And it's our job to be able to provide them with a safe way to live. And that was one of the reasons that we looked at this site, is because it was most cost effective and we could spend the money the best way possible in order to benefit the homeless.
And additionally, the design for this building is beautiful. It is actually going to enhance a very large property on State Street with, color and greenery and a finished parking lot right now that sits pretty unused and unloved. And the value of creating a beautiful space does create value for that community. And I think that's built in. But I do believe that there are requirements by the city, the county, ACHD for sidewalks and things like that. I have never heard that falls on a homeless shelter, but if you need us to rally to get that stuff done and support you in our efforts to get more sidewalks into our neighborhood, you got it. I mean, we will rally with you because those are all necessary pieces to a safe neighborhood. So we'll team up for sure.
I think the one other thing that is important to recognize, for everyone to recognize, is that the purchase of the building is one bucket of money. It's much less than the next bucket of money, which is really the investment. And the investment is not just into the building, but that investment actually echoes into and ripples into the community. So we talk a lot about property taxes, and I'm not an assessor, and I know that property values also equate to property taxes. I have a strong hunch that an assessed value on a vacant warehouse is considerably less than it's going to be on an improved an improved housing shelter, and associated services facility. So that, one of the questions was, we're going to see, or a concern was, we're going to see a loss in value. And I actually think that this kind of investment in the fabric of the neighborhood is a positive impact. So on a fiscal sense, as well as bringing energy and life to that corner.
Okay, thank you. We are at a little past 8:15. I want to go ahead and take a quick break, give you a chance to get a drink of water, use the restroom. I will do the same. Let's see, why don't everybody please plan on coming back at 8:25, and we'll continue with the question and answer through raised hands. Thanks so much, and stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. I just want to introduce our panelists again in case folks are just joining us. So in the middle of my screen is Jody Peterson-Stigers, Executive Director of Interfaith Sanctuary. To her right is Andy Erstad from Erstad Architects. And to her left is Nick Guho of Guho Construction. So thanks to the three of you for being here. And thanks to those of you who've stayed in the queue with your questions and comments. We will just keep plugging right along. Just want to thank everybody again for speaking your minds, but doing so respectfully. It's been heartening to be a part of this. Clay Elkin, you are up next.
Hi there, this is Clay Elkin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I've got some very specific questions, and I think it comes down to what a lot of people have been talking about, and I do want to hear specifically in between those questions a short answer. So this all boils down to trust for our neighborhood. We are a really compassionate neighborhood. We're a really hardworking blue-collar neighborhood. And we want a voice in this process, and we feel like trust has been broken, and we haven't had a voice outside of, as you guys have mentioned, the process that the city creates through law. But outside of that, we really haven't felt like we've had a voice. And to my neighbors who are out here, we're not victims here. We're a really strong neighborhood. We're really hardworking. We're going to continue to organize and protect and grow our neighborhood and our community and find that voice. So my first question about that trust is Jody, will you just say that you hear that you and your, that's my 2-year-old yelling, sorry.
Hi.
Will you just tell us that you hear from us that you've broken our trust? Just let us know that you hear that.
I hear that you say that I have broken your trust. Yes.
Okay. My next question is, will you own and take some responsibility for breaking that trust? You and your board. Will you own some responsibility for breaking that trust?
Absolutely, because it certainly wasn't the process that we anticipated or wanted. And so the first thing we wanted was to be able to go into this with trust and connection, and it didn't happen. And we all, we wish that it was a different story, but Clay, I believe that we can still do that. That's why I'm here now. That's why I'll come meet with you.
Okay. And here's my last question. So I appreciate you owning some responsibility with that. Thank you very much. And saying that you hear us.
I do.
My last question is, so hearing you talk about all the other organizations that you partner with and work with downtown, after doing some public information requests, seeing all the meetings and all the planning that's gone on with big players in the city at the city level, seeing names like Guho and Erstad next to this project, who are big players in the development game around here, and knowing all of your board members and all the connections they have, can you see how it feels like to us? This is big money. This is lots of organization to concentrate poverty in our neighborhood, and that trust is broken. And my question is, after us hearing what you talked about with your current neighbors down there and knowing the impact that you've made down there, how can we just trust these promises that you're saying, these assurances that you're making, without us having to say, no, we're strong, we're going to organize, and we're going to protect and grow our community. We don't need you guys to come in and save us. We don't need you guys to come in and tell us what's best for our community. How can you expect us, and what are you specifically going to do to build that trust after it's been broken so far?
Clay, Nick Guho, as a part of the community, we believe in supporting the community, not only as a company, but as an individual. And you say, how does the community develop trust? And over the last, I don't know, we've been doing it probably for about 8 years. we've built numerous charter schools. We took the old Park Center Mall that was an abandoned mall structure and there was no use for it. And we turned it into Sage Charter School over a 2-phase period. Well,
yes, sir. I know that. I worked at Sage. I was there when that move happened.
And
I
I just want to explain something as how trust is developed with Sage and the rest of the charter schools. They have to operate for 5 years before they can get permanent funding, so they can develop the trust of the banks and the institutions to permanently fund those organizations. And with Sanctuary, they have proven their record that they were asking earlier how they can sustain themselves in this organization going forward. Well, over the last 10 years, they have done that, and they proved that they're not going away. And I believe strongly in the organization, and I support it. And I believe that to me, they have earned my trust that they're not going away. And I think you have to surround yourselves with organizations that do that.
Okay. Jody, did you want to add anything, or should we move on?
Well, Clay, I will say that the reason why we have such fine human beings that sit at our board and sit at this table is because we're a fine organization that have proven ourselves in our commitment to not just serving our guests, but improving the neighborhood where we currently are at. We've created so much programming to tell a different story, and we're lucky to have Guho Construction and Ørsted Architects, but it's not because we're rolling in money. It's because they're going to find ways for us to find partners to keep the cost down, but the quality up, because we are a trusted organization and we will stand the test of time. And you can trust us, Clay. You just have to get to know us. Come visit us at the shelter. Come meet our staff. Come meet our guests. I mean, all of you are invited to not just hear me talk about it, but come and be a part of it and see that we're not making this up. We are a thoughtful organization who has created some meaningful programming that doesn't fit in our building anymore. And so we need a bigger building, and that building's on State Street. It's on State Street. And so I want to trust you too. I want to trust that this is going to be a safe place to land for my staff and for my guests, and that we're going to be able to work together. So trust does go both ways.
Okay, thank you for your comments and questions, Clay. Next up is Glenn Lyons.
Hi, Jody. We certainly appreciate the passion that you've shared tonight and demonstrated in your historical management of Interfaith Sanctuary. My question has to do with how did you arrive at the decision to sell your current facility before obtaining approval for your operations and business plan for the targeted site on State Street?
Because we couldn't buy the new building without selling the old building. And so I went on faith and hope. And, if it doesn't work out, I'll own a building that I'll have to do something else with. But I believe in this project, and I believe in the process. And I know that we're going through all the right steps. And sometimes you just got to go with your gut. And this opportunity was important, and we had to figure out a way to do it. And so that's why we rolled the dice. There's no guarantees, but we're willing to kind of put it all out there and try and make it happen because it's needed.
Okay, thanks, Jody. And thanks for that question, Glenn. Up next is Atanasio Zuluaga. Not Ignacio, you'll need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, so basically all the questions I wanted to ask have been asked. So I just want to say, and this may sound heartless, but I don't want to welcome you to my neighborhood. So that's it. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ignacio. And of course, you are welcome to keep your hands raised if you want to make a comment like that. But if you feel like your question has been answered, you can lower your hand too. And no judgment on Ignacio's comment. That's fine. But I should have said that earlier. Let's see, Chad Ritzer.
There we go. Good evening.
Hi, Chad.
Thank you for taking time to convey your plans, and I'll echo what other people have said, is that we all appreciate your passion about helping the homeless, and think that your project is probably an amazing project, but maybe unanimously agree that it's probably not the right location. So I'm curious about the rate of graduation, I'll call it, from attending your homeless shelter as a guest to becoming homeful instead of homeless. So it looks like around 3%. So how does a larger facility help provide a better transition from homelessness to homefulness for your guests?
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't. It provides space to hold people safely until access to housing becomes available. Our numbers are growing for our homeless community faster than our affordable housing options are popping up within our community. So we're trying to hold space in a safer, better way to reduce trauma and create a community and a space where, even though you can't quite get out, you're still willing to take the steps and work hard for that someday. And that's why we are doing this project, so that we buy time for that someday for them.
Okay, thanks for that question, Chad. Next up is Susan Bond.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thank you, Jody, for the work you're doing. It really is needed, and a lot of us feel that you're doing a really good thing. But I would like to ask you, has anybody thought about the traffic on State Street?
50,000 cars.
With our guests, as far as their safety?
Yes.
We have. We definitely have. I think it's a well-known fact that there's a safety issue for your whole neighborhood with the speed on State Street. We have heard that there are some plans coming to improve pedestrian crosses, and so there are plans in place. They haven't started yet, but we're hoping that that process will create more safety for our guests as well, and for everyone else in that neighborhood, because it's definitely not designed brilliantly right now, but hopefully the improvements are coming, and we'll certainly make sure that we work on best practices for how you navigate kind of the crossroads and things like that. I mean, I wouldn't want to cross that street, so I get you. So thank you.
Thanks for that answer, Jody, and thanks for the question, Susan. Okay, next up is Rachel Pulliam, and if memory serves, Rachel had the question about kids in schools and safety, so she might be able to provide a little more detail here if she.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. And my question wasn't necessarily about the safety of the walking back and forth to school. It was more just kind of part of the responsibility of dealing with like the higher risk people is to keep them in situations where we're not putting them at higher risk of other things happening. So I guess my question is was there discussions, and what was kind of the thoughts on putting this in a location where there's 3 schools within, less than a mile, plus a retirement center? Although they're wonderful people, they are a little bit more high risk. And I just wondered if there was thoughts and discussions about the fact that this is kind of a unique area as well, where there's so many concentrated schools and retirement, putting higher risk people with a more vulnerable and not economic, but like age group population.
we serve such a crossover of that population. We serve seniors and we serve medically fragile. We have a preschool in our actual shelter. Currently we have 32 children living with us at the hotel. And our children are actually served by a different school that is designated for our homeless children, Garfield. So we won't utilize that particular school system, but we will utilize the parks and the greenbelt and the restaurants and things like that. So we have very similar population living in our shelter. There are people that are suffering with mental health and addictions that actually own homes too. And we just all have to be cautious and treat people equally and kindly and hopefully help each other. But I think the practice is still the same. I really do. I believe that however you would navigate your neighborhood now, you would navigate your neighborhood, because our shelter is on a busy street and it's completely contained on the backside. And our homeless population know they're not welcomed. And so walking into a neighborhood for them would be terrifying. They are non-visible as much as they possibly can. When they need help, hopefully we can all offer help, but the fact is the way that this shelter is set up and the way that the neighborhood moves back, and it limits the exposure based on design alone. So I hope that helps. I think I'd like to answer that question. I'd like to reassure you, because safety is such a fair concern, but it's a concern for us too. It's a concern for us too. How will we know that our population will be treated fairly and kindly and not harassed or bullied or given a fair shake? How do we talk about that?
Okay, thanks, Jody, and thanks for that question, Rachel. Next up is, I think it's Jillian. It could be Gillian Bovard. Jillian.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for being here this evening and answering our questions. I actually have two questions. One probably directed more towards Andy and another towards you, Jody. I'll start with you, Jody. I'm just curious about the funding for this project, specifically the increase to your operating budget. A project this size will increase the number of people you're serving considerably, almost double. You've talked about, the funding that you're receiving during this, the emergency funding you're receiving during this pandemic will eventually run out. How do you expect this move will increase your annual budget permanently going forward? What are your plans to secure that funding? And then will you be relying on the city of Boise to supplement that funding in some sort of way?
No. The city of Boise, the way that the funding for homelessness comes from a federal fund through HUD. And then the city of Boise distributes that government funding to different homeless agencies and services. We don't accept federal funding because of the way that we operate. And so the only way that we can bring money into our system is through private funding. Things that happen, like events, donor programs, grants, foundations, things like that. Right now we're running 4 shelters. We've increased our staff from 20 to 39. And so we're expanded more than we've ever been. We'll actually be able to run a lot easier in a single building. Our staff, the way that we cover dorms and programs and things like that, it is within our ability, we believe, based on projections for a budget to do this building, that we have the bandwidth, we have the support, we have the donors, and we have very special ways of getting people engaged with the building that should really help create real security and sustainability. So it's kind of in the plan.
So specifically, what is your current operating budget, and how much will this project increase that budget?
Well, we certainly don't have an exact number, but our current budget is 1.8 million, which is kind of, there's some reimbursement because we're doing some FEMA work, but my job this year is to raise $1.8 million to operate 4 different shelters with some funding coming in to help me.
Okay.
Okay.
And my second question, I think is for Andy. I don't know if I'm probably not alone in not understanding the specifics of that conditional use permit or that conditional zoning permit. I'm looking at the City of Boise website right now, and I think we focused a lot on the beautification of the space and specifics to that building itself, fencing, etc. But there are other conditions that apply, such as, that the proposed use would not adversely affect other properties in the vicinity, transportation, etc. Can you address specifically what are the conditions that you have to meet on that conditional use permit and how you plan to do that?
It's a great question. And I'm glad you're looking at the city's website to see just how complicated a simple conditional use application is.
Hey, Andy, it's Jen. It's a little hard to hear you. I don't know if your mic is covered up by your vest.
It was off. They're trying to silence me. Julian, the comment I was making is that the zoning ordinance is not simple in the least bit. It's pretty complicated, and when you go for a conditional use, there are a number of things that will be applied to that to the conditions of our approval, and they aren't just specifically within the zoning ordinance. They also tie into other agencies. Ada County Highway District has, as we say, a bite at the apple. We have Boise City, we have fire department, we have basically all of the agencies will have a look at the conditional use application to gauge impact into the community, impact on the particular site, availability of services, things of that nature. I could go on and on and on. At the end of the day, we really are applying for the use within the zone. The zone allows for the use under a conditional use application. We apply for a design review because the D designation in the C2D zone is design review. And so we have, within the design review guidelines, we have to meet certain site conditions, beautification, landscape, and all of that. So within that, we have setbacks, we have lighting, we have finishes. They'll talk about everything of the design on the exterior of the building. The conditional use does not talk about the interior of the design, and it's really the exterior, the use of the property and the exterior, along with design review. So complicated. The application, the minute that it's turned into the city, becomes public record. I heard somebody say we've done public record searches and this and that. We've not submitted anything into the city of Boise. We've had conversations as anyone would have as you are investigating the process and the requirements that the city will have. So as soon as that's available, any one of you can request that. I think you can actually go online and see the application and all the documentation supporting it.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And thanks for that question, Jillian. Okay, up next is Erin Roos Sullivan. Aaron, you might still be muted.
I'm here.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to tell her that the answer is no, she may not come into this community. Why is she still pushing?
Okay, so that's the question, Jody. Aaron would like to know why you're still pushing. I think the subtext here is when there's a lot of resistance, why move forward? Thanks, Aaron.
It's necessary. Every community has a responsibility to take care of their own, and it's on all of us to make sure that there's enough shelter and space, and we're pushing because we have to, because there's not enough room for us to do what we need to do, and we're not asking for any crazy considerations or anything. We're asking to beautify a building and move in a very programmed shelter into a neighborhood. And we're pushing because it's the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Lyle Cardoza. And Lyle, you may need to unmute yourself as well.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I've got a pretty simple logistical question, but Jody, I have to make a comment in response to something you said earlier. Somebody asked about safety in regards to the Greenbelt, and you made a comment to the effect that there are already sex offenders in this neighborhood, and somehow that should just wipe away the possibility of any danger that could potentially come along with this facility. And it was so disingenuous and so offensive. And you say that you don't, that you're not, that you have not used dark language, or you're not the one out, you know, who's calling the people of this neighborhood a bunch of NIMBYs or anything like that. But to do, I mean, I have seen enough sleight of hand magic to recognize that move, and it is just, it is nauseating. And I'm sorry, I'm really trying to maintain my civility here. But to the point that has been repeated over and over again, that you are committed to this location. You have said over and over again that you want to work with the people of this community to figure out the way that it's going to fit in this neighborhood. But what if it doesn't fit? What if 300 people in a homeless shelter in this neighborhood doesn't fit because it is 300 people? Okay, if you brought in any building, I don't care if it is a luxury high rise, if you are planning a building for 300 people without any kind of environmental impact, without having plans for how the logistics will work, without addressing traffic, without addressing any of that, it would be a problem. And you seem so shocked and so disappointed and so upset with the people of this neighborhood because we're not willing to just have faith and accept this shelter with open arms, but you're not able to answer these basic questions. So here's one question that, as far as I'm concerned, needs to have an answer before this project should be able to be considered. I just want to know how a building that was designed for retail, that probably has 2 or 3 bathrooms, how it's going to handle the sanitary needs of 300 people who need to wash and use the toilet every day.
So Lyle will answer that question, but the first thing I want to recognize is that my point is that in every community there's unsafety, and that we all need to be aware of it. But the fact is, the portrayal of our homeless population has been so unfair that we simply have to point out that there's a big mix that live in houses too. And so I think that's something that should be considered. And I'm trying not to be angry when I hear about how you speak about our population, but in fairness, we have to both be kinder, right? I'm just making you aware that we don't have any sexual offenders in our programming because of the families with children. So we're not bringing that risk to your neighborhood. And as to the question about sanitation and all of that, I will let Nick answer that question about the interior design somewhat, because obviously we're building based on code, the appropriate amount of bathrooms, showers for families, for medically fragile, for men and for women. It's all under the design of the building. So Nick, I don't know if you want to go into detail about that.
When a building is designed and laid out, there's supportive services that have to support that building. And there's you've got sewer out in the front of the building, you got your power lines in the back of the building, you've got your storm drainage that is dealt with on the property, and all those utilities are adequately sized for that size of building to support the needs of a shelter and the required amount of toilets and showers that will be designed appropriately to the use. So the building is 100% capable of housing a shelter facility, as well as it did the I believe it originally was a cold storage facility, and then Salvation Army moved into it as another use. For the different uses, there's the supporting utilities there to support it.
So just for clarification's sake, the interior of the building will be virtually totally gutted, and all of the services that Nick talked about will be put in place to support, per the code, per the life safety codes that we designed to and we are held to. So it's not you're not going to walk into the building on day one and provide the services. The building will have a very significant interior and exterior remodel, and that was one of the points I was making. Is the purchase of the building is one thing, the remodel costs and the investment in the building will be significant to meet the shelter requirements.
Okay, thank you very much for that question, Lyle, and for those answers from the panelists. Okay, next up is Jeffrey Street.
Hi, Jody. As a follow-up to my last comments, you asked for questions. So I guess what I intended to ask with what I shared is, can you name one concrete thing that you all have changed about your plans, or a plan or a proposal that you guys have come up with in response to community concerns in the area, whether it be crime, traffic? What is one thing you've changed or come up with?
We increased the number of families to serve and reduced the general population in respect for the neighborhood. We've enhanced the security around the entire property. We've agreed to 10-foot fences and fast-growing hedges for not just privacy, but also, sound and issues like that. When we are asked to address something that can be solved, we'll do it in a heartbeat. So we've addressed the things that have actually been asked of us. So if there's anything that we can do to accommodate this project in this neighborhood to make it feel safer and more comfortable, that's what we're here to do.
Okay, thanks, Jody, and thanks for that question, Jeffrey. All right, Forrest Flores.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Okay, I am looking currently at a May 15th, 2020 news article in the Idaho Statesman talking about the urban renewal project that is going to be running up and down State Street. What I'm interested in is how much of your private funding is coming from property developers who take advantage of the lowering of property value in this neighborhood. I'd also like to add, I will be donating money to the Veteran Parks Neighborhood Association after this call, because this has not been one of those things that has invoked trust.
Thank you.
Andy, do you want to take the urban renewal district question?
Well, I think the real question is how much money we're taking. I wasn't totally sure how much money we're taking for this project, or from urban renewal and others. We have
Zero.
zero. This is right now. This is a private private project on a private piece of property, and it sits back off of the right of way considerably. I think everyone is aware there's a frontage street along State Street, which it is not anything that we get to deal with.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I have John Tillman next. John, you may need to unmute.
Just a second. There we go. Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Yes. As a second generation Boise, which we've been here close to my parents in my 86 years, I'm very concerned about the location. First off, I think you have the cart before the horse. I think it would have been nice if you would have had a neighborhood survey done and a neighborhood meeting and the Veterans Park Neighborhood Association to discuss your plans before you sold your property and before you purchased the Salvation Army property. Okay, you've got the cart before the horse. So right now, you've got the neighborhood in a position and you have Boise City P&Z in a position to where if they deny your planning and zoning permit, where are you going to go? Okay. I want couple other things to say. You have a neighborhood that has got a couple of bars. You have Burger and Brew across the street. You have a battered women's shelter and a refugee area. You have a lot going on there. Now, you say the neighborhood is not going to have any more exposure because these people don't want to be seen, and you're going to keep them fenced in somewhat. Well, they're going to go across the street to the park, to the Willow Lane Park. From the Willow Lane Park, they're going to go down Willow Lane where there's two relatively new cul-de-sac subdivisions and newer homes to the Greenbelt. They're going to go back and forth. The problem is Boise police know that the park is the wet park, which everybody knows you can drink alcohol there, and the police cannot arrest anybody there for drinking alcohol in public in the park. Okay. The city's going to get a lot more taxes from your property downtown. So they're going to be all hopped on board about this going through. Okay. You've given the neighborhood no choice, and you're giving planning and zoning virtually no choice in what's going to happen. So what is your plan B if you don't get approval? Hello?
Hi. I don't have a great answer for you, John. We'll own the building and there'll be value to that building, and we'll have to go from there.
Okay, thank you, Jody. And thanks for your comments and question, John. Nicole Mort.
So of course, no neighborhood wants the possibility of sex offenders and violence, but what sets Veterans Park apart is that, one, we already have several community housing buildings, Bel Air Point, the Good Samaritan, refugee housing. This move would use resources for the people already struggling. This will create a slum in the wonderful area that we have here. Two, State Street is dangerous. You are putting your guests at risk. And three, this is classist and would not go forward in the North End. So why are you moving forward?
Nicole, no disrespect, but it's been asked and answered. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody, and thanks for that question, Nicole. Maria Santa Cruz Cernak. And Maria, you look like you're still muted.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. Hi, I'm a different perspective here, and I wanted to say thank you to Jody for everything. I've been on the other side of the fence, and I could hear so much confusion as to really what you are doing, because you've said it over and over again, and I wanted to help reiterate what you are trying to do here. This is like a privately funded, like you said, for the poor, whereas there are private facilities for the rich and they don't get any of this kind of flack. So needless to say, I think you're doing great and I appreciate everything that you are doing, and keep doing it. I get you, and I think there's a really bad stigma about the word homeless, and if anything, that mindset will not be changed, because people are people. And if they don't know, if they've never been on the other side of the fence, they will never understand that these people are going to your facility to get better. Just like any other brothers and sisters or aunts and uncles who are alcoholics and drug addicts that want to get themselves better, they go to a rehab. It's all about the words being played on here. Yeah, they may be homeless, but they're no less of a person. But give them credence and kudos for trying to better their lives. Okay, and boy, if that was something that hung over my head back then, they just wouldn't. They don't know, you know. So I just wanted to give you props, and I wanted to help you out here. And over again, you are helping them get better because they want to get better. The ones that you have to worry about are the ones who are not in there and still out in the street. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks for that comment. All right, Ryan Rekla.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I had a couple questions for you. So one of my questions, so I'm concerned as all other neighbors are here, you know, and so I live on the canal bank going across Veterans over there. You know, right now, it's beautiful back here. You know, I have privacy, I have this beautiful area. You know, what I'm concerned with is that, you know, I know that this is private property, no trespassing, canal bank stuff. So my question is, are you going to make sure that a bunch of people don't turn this into a highway for getting to the park? Is one of my questions. And I guess my other question is, you had mentioned that you didn't know much about the park system around here. And my other concern is because part of the reason I moved here, I actually bought this property and developed it. There's 5 beautiful houses down here. The main reason people move here is because of the green belt. And you said you hadn't looked at it much, but like we have some of the most secluded green belt, you know, and the park systems down here that I'm curious, I'm concerned with. When you look at the parks where you're at now, they're very open, very manageable, very policeable. Down here, they're definitely not. You go over into Veterans Park and those areas, and it's nothing but seclusion, and I just think it'll probably be a problem. So I was curious what you'd say about those.
No, I mean, that's a really good point. I'm not that familiar with the Greenbelt section because we've operated on a different Greenbelt section, but I'm definitely, we will absolutely look into it. And then I just want you to know, Ryan, that once this project gets to the next phase and it becomes permitted, then the community piece comes in. And so that's when they kind of look at the project, look at the neighborhood, and then they come up with, you know, some real support systems to help us be successful in this neighborhood. So I can't answer for them, but I can assure you that a plan will be developed to help us all settle into the neighborhood together.
Okay, thank you for that comment and those questions, and thanks for those answers, Jody. Okay, next up we have Ramon Hobdi Sanchez.
Thank you, Jody. I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Ramon.
I just wanted to mention third generation Idahoan, second generation here in Boise. Spent my entire life here on Collister Drive, and it's been interesting listening to everyone that has comments tonight, and just wanted to provide a little voice on the other side. Really excited to welcome you, and I think it's an exciting project. If I were a part of your board, I would absolutely understand why you would want to pounce on an opportunity like this. You know, there's a lot of comments about things being rubber stamped and maybe predetermined. And I would invite folks to do a little research on the infill that's occurred around here. I mean, back in the day, this was just farms. And so I'm just curious how long people have really been here and didn't have much of a say in all those homes being built. So I think this is just kind of how administration works. And I think the folks that have a lot of support for you, but don't want you here, didn't do a very good job of coming up with solutions. So I hope those folks can really identify some solutions if this isn't the right option. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that comment, Ramon. All right, so we're at 9:15, and I'd still like to we have some people with their hands up. I think I'm gonna try to call on folks who haven't asked a question yet or made a comment yet, with the goal of maybe potentially wrapping up at 10. I think that would be good for everybody. 4 hours is a long time. If we don't get to your second comment or your second question, please make sure to put those in the Q&A. And like I said, that transcript will be saved. So next up is Deborah Frank.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Jody, I want to thank you for being here, but I want to go ahead and reiterate and go back on something that you said earlier in the meeting. And we know that you are not a discriminatory emergency shelter and that you serve all, including the addicted. You also stated earlier that the addicted get their drugs from the downtown alleys, quote, downtown alleys. And I want to tell you that that's simply not true. I live on the fringe. I live 0.9 miles away from the Salvation Army's front door. That's front door to front door. I'm not in Veterans Park. I'm in Sunset Park. So I see drug dealing every other day on the north corner of 35th Street and Anderson Parkway. Specifically, right on the back corner of Albertson's parking lot. So every day, this is the place that you say that your patrons, your clients, your people will use the market, the grocery store. Your clients will shop at that. This is happening every day. I've watched people overdose on the lawn directly behind Albertsons. Yes, we're talking about Albertsons on West State Street and Veterans Parkway, where it turns to 36th. I know personally the manager there. He has to scout the property weekly with his clients, gloves in hand, for needles, for alcohol bottles.
So Deborah, let me interrupt for a second, because
No,
what I want to, no, I just wanted to clarify that we only know about what we're experiencing with our guests in our area. So I just wanted to make it clear, I'm not sure what's going on there, but our challenges are in our area.
This is only 0.9%, 0.9 miles away. So I see this. I see the EMTs come and take away the people who overdose. You think that this is not happening in our neighborhood. It is. It's not just happening in the back alleys of downtown. And so my question is, do you really think that that these, you know, not the abusers, but the drug dealers are not going to come into our neighborhood? Do you think they're going to be in our back alleys? Well, you're just saying you don't have a back alley. You're secured. They're going to come into our neighborhood. They're going to come into Veterans Park. They're going to come into Collister. They're going to come into Sunset. So my question is, are you going to provide 24/7, like you call, like you say, 24/7 weekly security and more than just one security guard? Or are you going to put all this law enforcement onto the city of Boise, the costs of the fire department, the EMT, etc.? Have you even looked at the impact that this is going to put upon our community? I am a one-woman crusade. They know me personally. I have people parking, leaving their open brown waste, draining into my gutter. I am 0.9 miles away from the Salvation Army.
Okay, Deborah, I want to give Jody a chance to respond to what you're saying.
Thank you. Is she going to provide security?
Okay.
Is she going to put it on this? Is she going to put it on the city?
All right.
So Deborah, first of all, I want to clarify that because of where we're situated right now, we have learned how to manage the dangers of the drug dealers within the alleyways of our current location. And we actually do rely heavily on the police department on occasion. It sounds to me like there's already a drug problem there. So I'm wondering what the Boise Police Department knows about that situation. And, you know, I'm making notes because clearly we want to enhance security. We're not in the business of securing an entire neighborhood, but we will provide security with our staff on our property for sure. So I'm a little unclear about what your expectation is, but for me, it sounds like you already have some issues and maybe we can work together because we do have some experience because of the fact that we've been downtown and surrounded by an alley. Maybe we could work together to come up with some real solutions together, because that's what we need. We need solutions. And we're so open to that. So hopefully that helps. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you, Deborah. Okay, Ricky Catalano. Ricky, it looks like you're still muted.
We're submitting on the 23rd, right?
So Ricky, it looks like you're still muted. There should be a microphone, a red microphone icon that you can click on to unmute yourself if you're there. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next hand. Okay, it looks like Ricky is staying muted. So we'll go to Terry Puckett next. Noah and the team, if you want to, there we go. All right, and Terry, if you'll unmute yourself. It's possible we have some folks in the queue who don't know their hands are up. I want to give Terry a chance to unmute, otherwise we'll move on. Okay, we'll go ahead and go to Brian Dace.
Hi, thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
I did have one comment and just a couple of quick questions. My comment is, I think it's unfortunate that you haven't taken the time to walk our neighborhood or look at the Greenbelt access that we have here. And my question is, you refer to your population as your guest and the people in your program. And I'm just curious, where do the people from your emergency shelter fall into those definitions? Specifically, how are they screened, as many probably don't have an ID that they can show you? And are they allowed to use the day services during the day? And if not, where do you expect that they will go?
Day services currently or in our new building?
In your new building?
So let me take on both of those. So we do require during intake, we will do a background check when we screen anyone coming into our system. And we have the ability to do some lookups with Ada County and things like that. IDs, if they don't have one, we help to replace it. We get their birth certificates and things like that. If they're not willing to get a birth certificate, they can't stay with us past 2 nights because we have to be able to verify. So it doesn't happen often, but that's kind of our process for that. I am so sorry. I'm getting a little tired. Would you please remind me what the second question was? I'm so sorry.
Not a problem. My second question was, are the people who come to you for the emergency shelter, are they allowed to stay and use your day services? And if not, and if you do turn them out, where do you expect that they will go?
Our guests are allowed to stay in, we have a day shelter for anyone in need of a place to be, for computers, case management, supportive services. That's kind of where we work with them to get their IDs, their social security, their Medicaid. And then sometimes they opt to move into our programming as well, or they're in our employment program. But anyone who's within our shelter system has access to bathrooms, showers, laundry 24/7, and they have access to the day shelter in the back property 24/7.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you, Jody. Okay, next up, Connie Seward. And Connie, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for being here, Jody, and letting us hear your heart and your hope. And I understand completely when you talk about your hope. We provide a room at our house for an otherwise homeless person who suffers from severe and persistent mental health issues. And I understand that sometimes all you have to go on is hope. I do not live in the area. I grew up in the area. My parents lived there. They've lived there for 60 years, and I am speaking on their behalf. They love using the Collister Shopping Center, the bank, the post office, the library, the stores there. Those are all very small and tiny. This is my first question. Do you not feel that an additional 1,200 people in a year would overwhelm those services?
Connie, where are the 1,200 people coming from? I'm so sorry. I need to understand that.
Okay. Sure. And my math's not great, but so you said your beds were around 276. I rounded that to 300. And you said they stay about 90 days. So that's a quarter of the year. So that's where I came up with the 1,200.
Got it. So actually, our guests don't time out, which is one of the reasons why we don't take federal funding, because our guests don't often have another place to go. And so unfortunately, based on the access to housing, we have guests that stay with us for over a year, sometimes even more than that. And so that 90-day number does not, it doesn't apply to our shelter system at all. So we do have guests that stay with us for a while, not trying, but just it's very tricky for certain groups to get housed right now. So but I appreciate how you were doing the numbers, but I just want to let you know that shelters don't have as much turnover as they used to.
Okay, so in a year, what would your approximate be? How many people do you think would be going through in a year?
Well, the way that we do it for funding and things is we multiply our beds by the nights. And so like we can say that we served, I'm gonna look to my staff really quick to see if they can throw me a number, but in a given year, we do how many nights of shelter? I feel like it's, but nights, bed count. So we do about 1,000 total guests a year. each of those beds then gets counted as well. But if you're looking at like yeah, so 1,000 guests a year, but then the scary number, but it's just based on how many times our bed was turned over by the same person or family or whatever, is 61,000. So that's how many nights we've made sure that someone has a safe place to be. But the number of those people within this last, because we haven't, 2021's new. So 2020 was approximately 1,000 guests we served throughout the year.
Okay, so then my number of 1,200 was a little bit above it, but we don't really know because the facility is not built and people aren't in it. So either way, we're close, 1,000, 1,200. It's a
yeah.
number right. So that center seems pretty full already. So you're going to, in a year's time, we're going to have that many people running through there. Do you not feel that will overrun that center?
No, I absolutely don't. Because you know what, sometimes I just don't feel equipped to answer a question because I don't have the background to answer that. I just know that if there's 267 people being served and over half of those are families, and then some are children and some are, I'm not quite sure why they're not permitted to go to that shopping center. Do you see why I'm confused? Like, I do believe that there's space. They're not all going to go there at the same time. But when they do go, they'll support commerce and business and things like that. So I don't think I understand your question. But if I do understand it, I do not believe it's an issue.
Okay, thank you for that question, Connie. So just a process comment, we're at 9:30. I think we will go until 10. We still have a number of hands raised. So I'm just looking at the clock. We may not get to everybody. So just a reminder that if we don't get to you, please make sure to put your comment or question in the Q&A. We've gotten through quite a few questions tonight though, and I think folks are just getting tired, and I want to make sure this stays productive while balancing that with giving folks a chance to participate. So next up is Todor Azurza. Looks like you're unmuted, Todor. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, good evening.
Hello.
Hello. So it's very simple. Listening to you, I have the feeling that this project is being rushed, but I might be mistaken. Therefore, I would like to know whether a comprehensive impact assessment has been performed related to moving the shelter to the new location. And if yes, would you mind sharing with us the detailed document, please?
What was that?
The request was a detailed environmental assessment.
Oh, yeah, that is in the process. It is not completed yet. It's close though.
Excuse me, I did not say an environmental assessment. It's a comprehensive impact assessment.
Okay.
It's environment, it's economic, it's neighborhood, it's security, everything that has to be done when a project of this magnitude is thought. And that's why I was saying that at the beginning, I thought it's been rushed, but I've been mistaken. So I thought that maybe you guys have a comprehensive plan. So I'm requesting that, if possible, to be shared with us.
I believe that planning and zoning kind of helps guide that. A comprehensive plan for this particular project is not required, but I do believe that there are measurements in place, as, correct me if I'm wrong, as you design this project to make sure that it does not put undue strain on the perceived usage of the building and area.
We are, just a clarification, we're still early in the design process as well. And so some of the questions that we have will be vetted out and will be evolved as we go through that final process. I'm going to just be honest with you. We've not been required to perform a comprehensive impact assessment based on your explanation of it. So I'm going to do a little research in the morning because I don't think it's not been an item that we've been requested or required to do.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And thanks for that question, Todor, that comment. All right, next up is Tracy Kreitz.
Hi there. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and thank you for being the moderator tonight. I don't know if you knew how long tonight was going to go, but I appreciate your patience and letting everybody's voices be heard. I also want to say what a great job I think our neighbors are doing in communicating our concerns in a fair and compassionate way. I'm proud of the questions and the research that they've done, and I hope that that doesn't get dismissed in this project. I am a business owner near your current location, and I can tell you that safety and security is a real and valid concern for this neighborhood, whether that's real or perceived safety. For example, our landlord had to cut down trees and bushes and shrubbery in our employee parking lot because people were camping out there during the day. We had to, sorry, I'll slow down. We had to change an alcove that was in our exterior of our building because there was human feces there and people doing drugs. And when we would take the trash out, we would often bump into people. And I don't want to say that all of your guests fall into that description. Those are obviously very extreme scenarios. But it is a real concern for this neighborhood, especially with the tree coverage and the amount of space that people will have to roam during the day. And so I don't think that that should be dismissed. The safety and security of our neighborhood is, I think, one of our #1 concerns, and especially for people with children and families. And whether that's real or perceived, it is a valid concern and one that should be addressed in this process. So my question for you is, are you willing to write into your conditional use permit some of those things that we've discussed tonight to ensure that you're holding up your end of the bargain and ensuring the safety and also the community and neighborhood feel that we have all worked really diligently to protect? And are you willing to write that into your conditional use permit so that we are able to check back in and see how you're doing and if you're fulfilling those said promises from tonight?
I'm going to answer this one. I think it's a decision of the city of Boise when they issue the conditional use permit. If there are conditions that we will need to meet, they will write it as a condition of the conditional use that we meet those conditions. So I think that's up to the city of Boise to decide on those requirements in order for us to get the conditional use permit.
I do think that the question was asked earlier too, and I think Andy was gonna, he was gonna look into it to see if that's something that we could, if that's something that could even happen, because we don't know. But Tracy, I want you to know that safety is absolutely a priority and concern. And I fear to say, I promise, but we have it within our policies, procedures, staffing, and everything that we will be stewards of safety, and we will try and create good practices, and we will work on I can assure you that the Boise Police Department and others will come together. We're not going to be alone in ensuring that we do this well, and we will hold ourselves to a very high level in our pursuit of, you know, creating shelter.
Tracy, I think the other thing is Patrick Messer asked the same question, and my commitment was to follow up with staff at Boise City and see how a matrix and how part of the conditions could be addressed to in essence, Patrick's question was how do we have a gauge? How do we gauge success? How do we gauge you're doing what you've committed to? So I think that's why I was flipping through my pages was I knew we had that question, and that was one of Patrick's questions. So we will that's still going to be a question that we'll follow up on.
Thank you very much for those responses, and thanks for that question and those comments, Tracy. Okay, Erica Afanita.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for taking my question. I'd like to reflect back to Rachel Pullman's question about the children in the area who are walking maybe to Taft Elementary. I found your answer a little inadequate in that there are 3 basic entry points to Taft Elementary School. So there's 36th Street area, there's Woody from the backside, and then there's State Street. So many children walk down State Street to access Taft Elementary School in our neighborhood. I'd like to have you address the idea that right now, without your facility there, multiple children walk down State Street to go to their current elementary school. When your facility is on State Street, 300 plus more people will be in that area that children have to walk by and or interact with and or have, I don't know, I guess interactions with on their way to school in the morning and home. So I want to know, you kind of passed off the idea that there are other people in the neighborhood who are maybe undesirable, but my point is that it's just 300 more people on a kid's way to school, and I'd like you to address that. Thanks.
Sure. Well, first of all, our guests don't have to leave in the morning, other than the ones who need to go to work or our children who are going to school. So the 267 guests that we currently have a bed count for are welcomed in our building. We'll actually have programming, breakfast, things like that. So it's kind of a secured property where there's not encouragement for people to be loitering in the front of the building. And so we're not there yet. And I think if we can kind of learn about the patterns and kind of see what this all looks like, if you guys can educate us and we can work together, we can have a safety team, we can see what it looks like. But I think we have to learn some of that stuff before we have like the perfect answer for you. But we want to make sure your kids feel safe and can walk to school, and we'll take every step necessary with you to come up with a really good plan. I don't know what that plan is right now, but I hope you'll sit and talk to us about it.
Thank you for that response, and thank you for that question. Okay, so this is either a really good Idaho name or I'm being punked. I'm up. So I'm not sure, but it's Bo Hunter.
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we
Hey,
sure.
Bo.
I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me?
Very, very faintly.
Hang on.
So I can, I've been listening all night. I think what I heard was that the new shelter would improve the beauty of our neighborhood and increase the value of our homes. Is that a correct statement?
I think that the building will be more beautiful than it is right now, and we hope that it adds value to the neighborhood.
Okay, so that's correct. You feel that the building will improve the beauty of the neighborhood and increase the value of our home.
I want to be careful that you're not making me out to be like someone who's like with certainty, but I can assure you, based on the design and the talent of the builders and architect, that the building will be much more beautiful. That I can assure you of, Bo.
Yeah, it was one of the other fellas that said the values would increase.
Bo, this is Andy Erstead, and you're referring to a comment that I made, and the comment was that with the increase, when you invest in a building in a neighborhood, when you invest in a building that right now is an underutilized, abandoned, vacant building, when you invest the amount of money that the sanctuary is going to put into it, it will increase the value of that property. The neighborhoods, when you have a building that increases the value of a property, it ripples throughout the neighborhoods. It tends to ripple. Now, I think Jody has it right. I'm not a tax assessor. I'm not a real estate agent. But I know that when we do projects in neighborhoods, all kinds of projects, that the values, when complete, the value of the property that we've worked on increases. So, and it was I think there was a comment made early on in the comments that, is Jody going to pay for the loss of value in properties? And I'm struggling with that one. That's when anyone moves into a neighborhood, if it has an impact on the neighborhood, do they get plus or minus? I think it's a kind of a challenging question. So the response to your question was, when you invest in a building that's underutilized and you increase the value of it, it tends to have a positive impact in the neighborhood.
Great, thank you, Andy. And thank you, Bo, for your question, your comment, and your patience. Okay, next up is Betsy Wells. Betsy?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I don't really have a question, just a little bit of a comment, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. And I'm not a member, I don't belong to any of the immediate neighborhoods. And I know that I would probably have a slightly different take on the situation if I were and I had to look at it from everyone else's point of view. And I do hear your concerns as far as neighborhood safety. And I don't mean to discount those concerns at all. But what I'd like to add to the conversation to maybe help alleviate those fears is to say that this dangerous homeless element that everybody's picturing is absolutely the minority. 95% of the guests at this shelter, you could walk by and you would never, I guarantee you would never know they were homeless. They look just like you and me. When you go to the shelter, it's oftentimes hard to differentiate who's a guest, who's staff, who's volunteers. They really are just like everybody else. They aren't a danger to themselves. They aren't all a danger to each other or to you and me. I was there one night for over 4 hours and I had left my car open. And I don't just mean unlocked. I had left the back, like the lift gate on my small SUV, completely open, left it up with my purse inside, all my belongings inside. And I came out, like I said, after 4 hours, after dark. Nobody had slashed my tires. Nobody had stolen my tires. Nobody was asleep inside. My purse and my money and my credit cards were all still in my car. And just if this goes through, I don't want all of you to be in a place of fear, because good things don't come from this kind of fear of the people around us. Just go into it with an open mind. If it comes into your neighborhood, give the shelter and the staff and the guests the benefit of the doubt and assume good intentions. I've seen Jody with her own hands with a broom and dustpan sweeping up the streets around, not even on the shelter property, around the area, cleaning up and making sure it isn't an extreme eyesore. She has such pride in the shelter. She has such pride in Boise, and that she and the rest of the board and the staff are not going to let this be just a junk heap disaster. They will make it a success. And the more that everybody surrounding them can work together, the more successful it's going to be, and the less likely that these fears you're having about your area are actually going to come true.
Thank you, Betsy.
That's all I've got to add. Thank you.
Thank you.
Betsy.
Next up is Katie Schmidt.
Hi, thank you so much. And for the last person that just talked, I just want you to know that we in the neighborhood really do feel that same way, that the shelter does provide some great services. And I don't think that our fears are so unfounded as that we're stigmatizing the homeless. I don't think that that's what's going on here. First of all, I want to say that one of the things that I don't think I heard quite addressed was when you do have a sexual offender that's not going to be staying, you said that there is another shelter that has a dorm that is for the sexual offenders, but you didn't quite address whether they are physically held there at your door and then put into transportation and taken there, or whether or not you refer them to that place, or whether they have the option of staying or going. So my fear is that that person can decide that they don't want to deal with it and leave, or that they get tired of waiting for the transportation and leave. That the transportation that brought them to your shelter it isn't going to stick around and then take them there, so that they're not actually brought someplace that is going to house them, so they end up wandering around our neighborhood or in the parks.
Okay, thank you, Katie.
And then I do have a few more questions after that.
So to answer that, our intake process starts at 5 p.m. And so between the hours of 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. is when people can kind of check into our shelter. If their background check does show that they're an SO, then we do in fact call the shelter, and we provide transportation to that shelter, particularly in the cold weather. Now that we're going to be farther away, transportation will always be provided. It used to be, just a few blocks. So we do make arrangements. I do want to let you know that most SOs coming out of any of the programmings or anything like that, it's very well known which system to utilize. And so we don't very often have someone that comes to our shelter either directly out of, prison or jail or anything like that, asking for shelter. So I do want to let you know that programming's, it's kind of a tight community, and people do know which shelters do what. On the occasions where it does happen, though, we do make sure that the other shelter is contacted. And your answer to the question, we will provide transportation to get that person to the other shelter. Absolutely. We've met about that as a staff already.
Apologies, Katie. I just want to make sure that we get to a couple of last questions here. We're in our last 10 minutes, so I'm going to take 2 more questions. If we haven't gotten to you yet, again, please leave your comment or your question in the Q&A function so that the team can at least review that later. So I'm going to take a question from John Bosch and then from Tana Barnes. So that is who is on deck, and everyone else, please leave your questions or comments in Q&A. Go ahead, John. You'll need to unmute yourself first. Okay, it looks like John, oh, there we go. You there, John? John, it looks like you're unmuted. Do you want to go ahead and speak? Okay. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties with John. John, we cannot hear you. So let's see, who does? Tana Barnes and then Chad Ritzer. Tana Barnes is up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
This is Pete Barnes and Tana Barnes here. We live about 500 feet from the shelter. Jody, I want you to have the opportunity to tell us again, did you know, you had no clue that the neighborhood was going to have this type of response? And then I have something to ask once you answer that.
Chad, I actually did expect that we would need to have some really good conversations with the neighborhood, but I think that all of us were hoping that it would be more, a little more easier, open-minded conversation.
Okay,
So this
okay,
has,
so
this has been a challenge,
we
but
need
I'm
to,
not surprised, and we're willing to, we understand, and we are willing to take questions and try and kind of build a bridge.
did you or did you not ask a city planner named Christopher, I think, if you could have the private meeting with the 300 people around the property and count it as this meeting we're having tonight?
Never.
Yes or no?
No,
Never.
absolutely not. No.
Okay, I want everybody in this conversation to go ahead and look at Boise's Better at the email string from Jody to the planners that talk about this meeting being canceled by only having the private people. That's all.
Okay.
I can't really hear him.
Thank you, Pete. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think people heard you. Okay, and then our last participant is Chad Ritzer.
Hello. I have three things, and I'll go quickly so you can get to them. And thank you for your persistence tonight. And I know it's been long. The first thing is, which of the local businesses adjacent to the proposed property have you consulted with to ask their opinions, viewpoints, thoughts about this location for your shelter? And then the second thing is, if you're full, will you permit camping on your premises? And thirdly, there are 12 establishments that either serve or sell alcohol within walking distance. How was that part of the consideration for your proposed location?
Okay, so the businesses, we have talked to the lawyer for Flying Pie to get her some information. We did do a reach out through email first. The camping, there's no camping permitted on our property at all. It's actually, we've never had camping on our property. There was 6 years ago, a tent city that grew behind the shelter in the alleyway, but that was not on Interfaith Sanctuary's property. So if our shelter is full, we try and make arrangements to get someone someplace else, but the option for them to pup a tent or sleep in a sleeping bag on our property is not an option. So I want to clear that up. And then the alcohol question, wherever we are at, there's alcohol, restaurants, bars. Our hotel shelter is across the street from a strip joint. Our guests are in our shelter by 5 p.m. and they're asleep by 9 p.m. They work really hard if they're on a path to recovery. So in a real world situation, when they're trying to, you know, make it on their own, they will be exposed to that. So I have to say, Chad, that we address that with our programming and things like that, but it's very hard to find someplace that doesn't sell alcohol or have a bar or some sort of entertainment that our homeless community might be around. It's part of a community. So I hope that answers your questions.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to thank Jody, Andy, and Nick for answering questions tonight. And I especially want to thank the over 250 participants who showed up tonight and who offered comments and questions, and I think communicated a real passion for their neighborhood through this process. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to everybody's questions. We'll make sure to record the transcript of the Q&A, and of course, there will be the recording of the video, the meeting as well. So again, I'm Jen Schneider. It's been an honor to facilitate this meeting, and I hope you all have a good rest of your night. Take care.